Sometimes the quietest stories hide in the noisiest places. Beneath the laughter, the chaos, and the endless universes, there lies a secret history, one that hums softly like a lullaby no one was meant to hear. Tonight we'll wander into that forgotten song, into the Citadel's hidden heart, and before we dive in, know this: we truly love that you're here. You matter. You're safe. We care for you more than you know. So before we begin the journey, tell us, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it there? Now take a breath. Hold your cup of coffee or tea close, and when you're ready, let's get started. No one truly remembers when the Citadel began. Some say it was built, some say it grew, but others, the quiet ones, will tell you it was whispered into being. Long before towers reached toward artificial skies, before thousands of Ricks and Mortys walked its narrow corridors, there was only silence, vast, unbroken, infinite. The kind of silence that hums gently in your ears if you stay awake too long at night. In that silence, a ripple formed. Not a noise exactly, but something softer, like a dream beginning to stir. It was not born from metal or invention, but from longing for a place where scattered pieces might gather, where voices that never found harmony might hum together in the dark. That longing became the Citadel's first foundation stone, though it was not stone at all, but memory. I invite you just for a moment to imagine that silence. Picture yourself drifting in a space without edges, without beginning or end. Imagine it not as frightening but as calm, like being cradled by an endless night sky. Within that stillness, one thought flickered. What if we were not alone? And the whisper answered itself. You never were. That was the first heartbeat of the Citadel. A thought shared across universes, a place to be dreamed into the void. The earliest Ricks did not call it a citadel. To them it was a campfire in the cold, a place where flickers of themselves could huddle, share warmth, exchange quiet words. The architecture was strange at first, nothing like the towers and bridges it would one day boast. Instead, it was almost childlike. Crooked walls stitched together, corridors that bent as if shy, stairways leading to nowhere. Yet in its awkwardness there was a tenderness, as though it had been built by someone who did not know how to construct a fortress, only how to build a home. Even then, there was something lonely about it. The Citadel was never crowded in those early days. A handful of figures wandered its halls, tired Ricks, some carrying children, some carrying nothing but silence in their pockets. They spoke quietly, not because there was danger, but because the vastness made loud voices feel unkind. The walls themselves seemed to listen, soaking in every word. There is a story, no one knows if it is true, that the very first Morty ever to enter the Citadel carried a sandwich in his hand. He did not eat it. He simply held it as he walked, looking around with wide eyes, the way children do when they step into a place that feels larger than their imaginations. Some say he set that sandwich down on a stairwell, and for weeks no one moved it. Not because they were afraid, but because it felt sacred, a tiny act of presence. The sandwich became a symbol of sorts, a reminder that the Citadel was not only for Ricks, but also for the Mortys who would walk beside them, offering small, human kindnesses in the vast machinery of existence. The Citadel did not rise quickly. It unfolded like a story told over many nights, each edition an echo of longing. One Rick built a tower because he wanted to see farther than his own regrets. Another constructed a garden with no sun, lighting it instead with soft lanterns that hummed like lullabies. Mortys painted symbols on walls, little suns, little moons, childish stars, that somehow made the sterile corridors feel less lonely. If you walked those early halls, you would not have heard footsteps. You would have heard breathing. You would have felt hearts beating, uncertain but alive. And somewhere, if you listened closely, you would have caught it again, the whisper, the same one that had first stirred in the void. It was never loud. It did not command. It only suggested softly, like a lullaby at the edge of sleep, stay a while. You are safe here. The first council was not a council at all. It was simply a gathering around a broken table. Half the seats were missing. One Rick leaned against the wall rather than sit. A Morty curled into his jacket, pretending to nap but listening carefully. No great speeches were made. They spoke of food, of safety, of how to keep the lights glowing through the long artificial nights. Yet beneath their words was something else, something unspoken, an awareness that they were building not only walls but also belonging, and belonging, as you know, is rarer than any invention. It is said that during those early nights, some Ricks could not sleep. They had spent lifetimes wandering, inventing, outsmarting entire galaxies, yet in the Citadel's stillness they felt something unfamiliar, restlessness not born of danger, but of possibility. To soothe themselves, they would walk the corridors, and sometimes they found other sleepless figures doing the same. They would pass one another quietly, perhaps nod, perhaps share a word or two, but more often they would simply walk side by side for a time, their footsteps weaving a rhythm like two lullabies overlapping. That rhythm, too, became part of the Citadel's heartbeat. If you stood in the center of the Citadel then, at its tender beginning, you might have looked up and seen ceilings made not of steel but of translucent glass. Beyond the glass, stars glittered, not always the same stars, but shifting skies borrowed from countless dimensions. It was as if the Citadel itself wanted to remind its people, "You are small and that is beautiful. You are many and that is enough." Over time, the whisper deepened. It became part of the walls, part of the air. Newcomers often said they felt something upon entering, something they could not name. A quiet tug, a sense of being watched over, as though unseen hands guided them gently into belonging. Perhaps it was only imagination. Or perhaps the Citadel, born of longing, remembered how it began and wanted to cradle each soul who entered. When the first lantern was lit, no one celebrated. It was only a light, after all. Yet one Morty, very young, clapped his hands softly, the way children do when they feel wonder. His small joy filled the hall, and for a moment the Citadel seemed warmer. That lantern would burn for many years, even as towers rose around it, even as halls multiplied. It was said that whenever anyone grew weary, they could come sit beside that lantern, and the whisper would be louder there, like a song humming just for them. And so the Citadel's story began, not with power, not with councils, not with rules, but with a whisper. A longing for togetherness stitched out of silence, carried forward by breathing footsteps, and the quiet acts of kindness that made the place feel alive. Even now, if you close your eyes, you might hear it. The same murmur in the dark, the same lullaby that asked nothing of you except to rest a while. Stay. You are safe here. That was the first chapter of the Citadel's secret history. A beginning soft as nightfall, tender as a child's hum, fragile as a dream you don't want to wake from. And though the Citadel would grow into towers, into councils, into stories both sorrowful and strange, its foundation would always remain that whisper in the void. Long before the Citadel became crowded with towers and endless halls, before Mortys filled classrooms and Ricks filled councils, there was one boy who dreamed differently. He was a Morty, small, awkward, unsure of his steps, yet carrying within him something unusual. For when he closed his eyes at night, he did not dream of one world. He dreamed of many. He would lie in a narrow bed, a blanket too short to cover his feet, and drift into sleep. And then, as if a door swung quietly open inside his mind, he would find himself multiplied. One Morty walking down a sunny street, where birds sang in languages no one could translate. Another Morty gazing from the window of a ship adrift among stars that pulsed like lanterns. Another still, sitting on the steps of a house that smelled of sandwiches and chalk, waiting for a Rick who never came home. The boy never told anyone at first. How could he explain it? How could he say, "I see myself everywhere, and yet I don't feel lost"? He thought it must be strange, even wrong, to be so many at once. And yet there was comfort in it too, like knowing that no matter how lonely he felt in one life, another version of him was laughing, or resting, or loved. At times the dreams felt heavy, too full to carry. He would wake with tears in his eyes, unsure if they belonged to him or to some other Morty, whose sadness had drifted across the veil. Other mornings he would wake smiling, warmth spreading through his chest, as though joy had traveled back through those dream doors to find him. The boy began to notice something. In every dream, no matter how different, there was always a moment of stillness, a pause, a soft breath like the hush before a lullaby begins. Sometimes it came while watching a leaf fall, sometimes in the hush of a quiet meal, sometimes in a gaze shared with someone who cared. Those pauses became his anchor. He came to believe that across all worlds, all versions of himself, there was always this, a reminder to rest, to breathe, to belong. He carried that belief quietly, like a hidden lantern inside his heart. One day, wandering the early halls of the Citadel, the boy sat beside an older Rick who was tinkering with a broken lantern. The Rick grumbled, muttered, sighed, then finally noticed the Morty sitting there with wide, thoughtful eyes. "Why are you staring, kid?" Rick asked. Though his tone lacked any sharpness, the boy hesitated, then said softly, "I was just wondering if you ever feel like you're more than one person at once." Rick frowned. "What, like you've got voices in your head?" "That's just called being alive, Morty." The boy shook his head. "Now see, like being everywhere. Like I'm me, but I'm also all the other me's, and when I sleep, I see them." The Rick stopped tinkering. His hands stilled, his eyes narrowing in a way that wasn't judgment but recognition. He studied the boy for a long time, then said almost too softly, "Then you've got the gift of echoes." The boy tilted his head. "The gift of what?" "Echoes," Rick repeated. "Most of us just drag our lives behind us like broken luggage. But a few can feel all their versions humming at once. It's rare. Doesn't mean you're crazy. Doesn't mean you're special either. Just means you'll never be truly alone." The boy let those words sink in. He would remember them forever. From that day he began to share his dreams in whispers. Not with everyone, only with those who would listen. He told another Morty once, one who felt lonely and unwanted, and the boy said, "I saw you in my dreams." "Another you." He was laughing. He wasn't alone. The lonely Morty blinked, then smiled, a small smile that looked almost like hope. The boy told a Rick once, one who had grown bitter and tired, "In my dream you built a garden, not because you had to, because you wanted to. You smiled there." The Rick only scoffed, but later, quietly, he was seen planting a tiny seed in an empty corner of the Citadel. The boy's gift did not change the Citadel overnight. It did not build towers or write laws. But it carried something gentle through its halls, the idea that no one's story was only theirs. That across all the echoes there were shared moments, stillness, laughter, kindness, that belonged to them all. In time, people began to seek him out. Not as a leader, not as a prophet, but simply as someone to sit beside. They would ask him softly, "What did you dream last night?" And he would tell them with care, offering little glimpses of other selves, other lives like lullabies carried on the wind. Some laughed, some cried, some simply listened in silence. But all of them left with a little more softness in their step, as if reminded that they were more than what they carried alone. There's an old story, perhaps only a rumor, that once, in the middle of a long Citadel night, the boy woke to find hundreds gathered outside his small room. Rick's leaning against walls, Morty's sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes heavy but hopeful. They had come not for answers, but for comfort. And so the boy spoke. He spoke of his dreams, not in grand detail, not as sermons, but as quiet truths. Of a Morty who learned to forgive, of a Rick who chose to rest, of worlds where even in sorrow, there was always stillness. The crowd listened in silence, and when he was done, they did not cheer. They simply breathed as one. A long, soft exhale, like the Citadel itself was sighing into sleep. The boy returned to bed, curled beneath his too small blanket, and for the first time in many nights, he slept without dreaming. Not because the echoes were gone, but because they were finally at peace. The Citadel would remember him not by statues or stories carved into stone. They would remember him by something simpler, a feeling, a gentleness that hummed through the halls, reminding every Rick, every Morty, that they were not alone. And though time would blur his name, though towers would rise and councils would form, the boy's gift of echoes would remain stitched into the Citadel's foundation, a secret heartbeat pulsing through the walls. If you pause now, close your eyes and listen. Perhaps you might hear it too. That soft, multiplied hum. The boy who dreamed in many selves, whispering still across the universes, "You are more than one story. You are many, and none of them are forgotten." In the early years of the Citadel, before its towers multiplied like reflections in a mirror, there were nights so quiet that the silence itself seemed to breathe. The corridors stretched long and pale, lanterns glowing faintly, footsteps echoing as if reluctant to disturb the stillness. It was during these nights that something new began to stir, a sound not made of tools or machines, not the grumble of Ricks or the chatter of Mortys, but a softer, older sound, A lullaby, no one knows exactly who began it. Some say it was a Morty child, too restless to sleep, humming to himself in the corner of a shared dormitory. Others believe it was an older Rick, haunted by memories of a long-forgotten song, letting it slip through cracked lips as he drifted toward dreams. Whatever its origin, the sound carried through the halls like a gentle tide, gathering strength not by volume but by repetition. The first time others heard it, they paused. It was not grand. It was not polished. It was fragile, almost broken, a tune half-remembered, the kind of melody that seems to come from the edge of memory rather than the present moment. Yet in its fragility lay its power, for those who heard it felt something stir inside them, something they hadn't realized they were missing. A young Morty once described it like this: it sounded like someone saying you're safe, even if they didn't have the words. The Citadel, vast and unfamiliar, began to feel smaller, warmer. People who had been strangers sat closer together, leaning quietly against walls, listening. Some hummed along without realizing. Some closed their eyes and let the tune wrap around them. Some wept softly, though they could not explain why. The song did not need lyrics. It did not need to be explained. It carried the weight of longing, of comfort, of belonging, all in its gentle rise and fall. And in time it became known as the lullaby of echoes. What made the lullaby strange and sacred was that no two versions were ever the same. Each time it was sung, it shifted, adapting to the voices that joined. A low hum here, a high whisper there. Sometimes it was almost joyous, sometimes heavy with sorrow, sometimes little more than a breath on the air. But always it circled back to stillness, as if the Citadel itself exhaled at the end, content. One night, a gathering formed around the central lantern, the very first lantern that had ever been lit in the Citadel. A Morty began humming. Then another joined. Rick cleared his throat, then reluctantly added his voice, gruff and uneven but steady. Soon the hall was filled with the sound, each voice carrying its own history, its own echoes, blending into something larger. No one led. No one commanded. The lullaby belonged to all of them. For some it became ritual. Sleepless nights were eased not with arguments or inventions, but with the lullaby. Small groups would gather, 3 here, 7 there, and let the melody drift between them until eyelids grew heavy and hearts grew calm. Children especially took to it. They sang while lying in their narrow beds, Mortys humming themselves into dreams, Ricks listening quietly from nearby. One Morty asked an older Rick, "Why does it help us sleep?" The Rick thought for a long while before replying, "Because it reminds us we don't have to dream alone." The lullaby began weaving itself into the very identity of the Citadel. Artists painted soft wave-like patterns on the walls to honor its sound. A gardener claimed his flowers bloomed brighter on nights when the lullaby was sung nearby. A teacher used it to calm frightened children, saying, "Listen, can you hear the Citadel singing with you?" In time, the song became something of a secret oath, though never formalized. It was said that if someone could hum the lullaby from memory, they belonged. They were part of the Citadel, no matter who they were or what they carried. It was a bond stronger than any council decree. Yet as with all things, the lullaby carried sorrow as well. On nights of loss, when someone was gone, when grief pressed heavy, the lullaby would change. Its notes deepened, slowed, becoming almost unbearably tender. In those moments, the Citadel itself seemed to bow its head, mourning with its people. There is a story told in hushed tones. One night, a Morty who had lost his Rick began to hum alone, tears streaming down his face. He thought no one heard. But soon voices joined him, first 1, then 3, then dozens, until the whole hall vibrated with sound, lifting his grief, not erasing it, but holding it gently. The boy wept harder, yet he was not alone. That night, the lullaby became a vessel for sorrow as well as peace. The Council of Ricks, when it eventually formed, never spoke openly about the lullaby. Perhaps they thought it too soft, too unimportant to record in their official histories. Yet even they, it is said, would sometimes linger outside the gatherings, listening, their stern expressions softened by the hum. And so, the Citadel grew, not only in walls and towers, but in song. The lullaby became a thread woven through its foundation. Some claimed that even the walls remembered it, that if you pressed your ear to the cold stone at night, you might hear a faint echo like the building itself humming along. Years later, when the Citadel was vast and crowded, When councils grew louder and rules more rigid, the lullaby remained. Not always sung openly, but tucked into corners, whispered in dormitories, hummed by children as they drifted to sleep. It was a reminder of gentler days, of beginnings shaped not by power but by longing and togetherness. And even now, across all the universes, if you listen closely in the quiet moments, when the night is still, when the stars blink softly, you might hear it. A faint hum, not from outside but from within, as if some deeper part of you remembers, the lullaby of echoes. A song not of one voice, but of many. Not of one story, but of countless. A melody that whispers, "Rest, you are not alone." You never were. The Citadel did not rise overnight. It was not born of a single blueprint or the stroke of a genius. It was shaped instead by hands, rough, trembling, calloused, clever, weary. Each brick, each panel, each light was touched by hands that carried both brilliance and burden. There was a Rick known simply as the Builder, not because he invented more than others, not because his designs were grand, but because he kept building when no one else would. His hands were not elegant. They bore scars, burns from experiments gone wrong, small cuts from hurried work. Yet those hands carried patience. In the early days, when the Citadel was no more than scattered halls stitched together, he was often seen alone, kneeling on the cold floor, pressing pieces into place. He never asked for help, but help came anyway. Mortys gathered tools, fetched lanterns, steadied ladders. Other Ricks shook their heads at his persistence, but still found themselves holding beams, welding joints, smoothing walls. The Builder never spoke much. He was not one for speeches, but if you watched him, you saw his language, the way he pressed a loose bolt twice just to be sure it would hold, the way he lingered over a window, not because it was needed, but because he knew someone would one day stop to look out at the stars. His hands were his words, steady and quiet. One Morty, young and curious, once asked him, "Why do you keep fixing things?" "They'll just break again." The Builder paused, holding a plank of metal across his lap. He looked at the boy, eyes tired but kind. "Because someone will sit here. Someone will walk this hall. Someone will lean on this rail. If it breaks, they'll fall. My hands can prevent that. That's enough." It was never about perfection. It was about care. Over time, others began to notice how the Builder's hands shaped more than structures. They shaped the way people felt within them. A crooked bench he welded together became the most visited resting place in the Citadel. Not because it was strong, but because it felt safe. A stairway he reinforced was where children gathered to play. A lantern he repaired burned with a warmth different from the others, its light softer, like a candle in a quiet room. The Builder taught by doing. His lessons were never written down, but carried in the small acts others began to copy. A Morty once stayed behind after chores to tighten loose screws in a hallway, whispering, "The Builder would want this steady." Another Rick, known for his coldness, surprised everyone by smoothing the splinters from a handrail. The Builder's language of care spread silently, like a gentle contagion of kindness. At night, when the Citadel grew quiet, he kept working. He believed that structures should breathe alongside their people, that they deserved tending even when no one watched. Some nights he hummed the lullaby of echoes as he worked, the sound blending with the tapping of tools, as though the Citadel itself was singing with him. There is an old story told in whispers. Once, the Builder found a child crying in a drafty corridor. The walls were thin, the air cold. The boy whispered, "It feels like the Citadel doesn't want me." The Builder said nothing. He only pressed his hands to the wall, feeling its chill. Then he worked through the night, patching the cracks, sealing the gaps. By morning, the air was warm. The child never forgot. The Builder's hands were not perfect. They sometimes trembled. Once he dropped a beam that bent beyond repair. Another time, a section he designed collapsed and had to be rebuilt. But even in his mistakes, there was tenderness. He would kneel beside the broken pieces, running his fingers across them as if to apologize, then begin again. His persistence taught others that care was not about flawless creation, but about returning again and again to the work of mending. As the Citadel grew taller, more complex, the Builder grew older. His hands stiffened, fingers curling with age. Yet still he worked. Others began to assist him more often, not out of pity, but out of reverence. They said, "If his hands can no longer lift, ours will lift for him." And so a quiet lineage began. A chain of care passed from hand to hand. The builder himself never sought legacy, but the Citadel carried him within its bones. Every railing held his fingerprints. Every bench bore his quiet intention. Every lantern that glowed softly in the night carried a little of his touch. Once, near the end of his life, he was asked if he regretted never inventing something grand, something worthy of history. He smiled faintly, hands folded in his lap. "History forgets inventions," he said softly, "but it remembers where we sat together, where we felt safe. My hands gave that. That's enough." When he was gone, the Citadel did not weep loudly. It did not crumble. It simply hummed a little softer, as though acknowledging the absence of its patient caretaker. Mortis and Rix alike gathered in the halls he had built, sitting on the benches he had welded, leaning on the railings he had smoothed. And for one long night, they did nothing but rest their hands on the walls, whispering thanks. The builder's story is rarely told in official records, but if you walk the Citadel carefully, you will feel him. In the way the corridors seem to cradle you, in the way lantern light pools softly, like a hand cupping your cheek, in the way benches tilt just enough to invite tired bodies to rest. His hands are everywhere, unseen but present, steady as breath. And even now, across the universes, there are those who build in his quiet way. Not for glory, not for perfection, but because they know someone will one day lean against what they made and for a moment feel safe. The builder's hands may be gone, but their work remains. A silent language whispered in every corner of the Citadel: care, mend, hold steady. Someone will need this even if you never meet them. There was once a Morty unlike the others, not because he was cleverer nor braver nor chosen by fate, but because his story began in a sky that held two suns. His universe was small, quiet and forgotten by most Ricks. The ground was scorched in the day, cool and silver at night. Two suns rose and fell, not in harmony but in opposition, one golden, one pale, each pulling shadows in opposite directions. The child grew up learning to live between contradictions. When the golden sun blazed, he would squint against the light, running into the fields where shadows stretched long and thin, like threads tugged too far. When the pale sun climbed the horizon, the world turned glassy, fragile. Plants closed their leaves. Animals retreated. The boy would walk alone, watching his own double shadow ripple across the dust. He never felt entirely at home beneath either sun. Between them, yes, but not within them. His family was poor, though poverty meant little in a place where everyone shared what little they had. His days were spent carrying water from the well, patching roofs with dried reeds, tending to goats that bleated nervously at the turning of the skies. Yet at night he would slip away, lying on his back in the silent fields, staring at the dance of suns and stars. He often wondered, if I am made of shadows pulled in two directions, which one is truly mine? There are stories that say this Morty dreamed differently. While others dreamed of running or falling, or faces they half remembered, he dreamed of paths. Endless corridors, sometimes lit by lanterns, sometimes dark, sometimes branching into 1,000 shimmering ways. He would wake with the memory of doors he had never opened, hallways that whispered his name. His grandmother once told him, "Dreams like that mean you are meant to walk far." The first Rick to find him arrived by accident. His portal gun fizzled and spat, collapsing into sparks as he tumbled into the boy's scorched village. The Rick was unlike any elder the child had ever seen. Ragged coat, sharp eyes, voice like rust. The villagers stared, half in awe, half in fear, but the boy walked straight to him. "You fell from the sky," he said simply. The Rick chuckled, coughing. "Something like that, kid." In time, the two became inseparable. The Rick fixed wells, taught the villagers how to harness the sun's heat into crude energy. But mostly, he spent hours with the boy, watching how he asked questions others were too tired to ask. Why do goats always turn to face the pale sun? Why does one shadow stretch farther than the other? Why do I feel like both belong to me and neither at once? The Rick never gave answers, only tools. He handed the boy magnifying glasses, scrap metal, chalk for drawing maps in the dust. "Questions are your inheritance," he said. "Answers are only borrowed." It was the Rick who first brought him to the Citadel. The journey through the portal was dizzying. The boy felt as if both suns tore him apart, then stitched him back together on the other side. When he opened his eyes, he saw not a village, not a field, but worlds stacked upon worlds. Ricks and Mortys swarming like rivers, halls spiraling upward, lights burning brighter than either of his sons. He stumbled, overwhelmed, but somewhere deep within he felt recognition. The Citadel was like his dreams. Endless corridors, branching doors, voices whispering from unseen places. His double shadows flickered under its lights. For the first time, he did not feel pulled apart. He felt strangely at home. Yet the Citadel was not gentle. Other Mortys noticed he was different. They mocked the way he sometimes squinted, as if searching for suns that weren't there. They laughed when he traced invisible paths in the air. Even other Ricks dismissed him as odd. "He's too slow," they muttered. Too dreamy, but the boy kept wandering. He would slip away from lessons, vanish into unused wings, press his hands to the cold walls. He whispered to himself, "There are doors here, I know it. I've seen them." One night, lost in a forgotten passage, he stumbled upon the builder. The old Rick was kneeling by a broken lantern, his hands trembling as he tightened a screw. The boy watched in silence until the builder glanced up. "You're far from your dorm, kid." "I was looking for doors," the boy admitted. The builder studied him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Doors, no, but there are walls. And walls can be softened. Sometimes they even listen." He guided the boy's hand to the lantern, showing him how to steady the glass, how to hold it gently so it would not crack. "Care for the walls and they'll reveal more than doors." The boy never forgot. Years passed. The two sons became distant memories, though sometimes he woke in the night with his skin burning hot, then chilled as if touched by both at once. He carried his double shadow everywhere, a reminder of beginnings he could not escape. Among the Citadel's Mortys, he was an outsider. But among the corridors he was something else, a listener. He lingered in quiet places, hearing the hum of pipes, the creak of metal, the faint echo of the lullaby carried in whispers. He felt as though the Citadel itself knew him, as though its bones remembered his two sons. Some say he grew into a figure of quiet importance. Not a leader, not a fighter, not a legend, but a bridge. When Mortys quarreled, he sat between them, patient as the shifting light. When Ricks dismissed their companions, he reminded them softly, "Shadows are made by light. Without them we see nothing." Others say he vanished one day, walked down a corridor no one else could find, following the echo of his own footsteps until the Citadel swallowed him. Perhaps he found the door he had always dreamed of. Perhaps he returned to his two sons. Perhaps both. But even now some claim to see him in their sleep, a boy standing beneath two suns, one golden, one pale, his double shadow stretching in opposite directions. He does not speak. He only raises a hand as if to say, "Between contradictions you may still belong. Between light and light you may still be whole." And then he fades, leaving only the warmth of twin suns on your skin, and the faintest whisper of a door opening where none should be. There are moments in a life that do not seem important at first glance. A shared glance across a hallway, the sound of footsteps falling into rhythm with another's, the quiet weight of sitting side by side with no words. For this Morty, the boy of two sons, one such moment arrived in the shape of a simple sandwich. It was late evening in the Citadel. The lamps hummed softly, the air buzzing faintly with the breath of countless corridors. The boy had wandered, as he often did, away from his assigned quarters. He preferred the forgotten places, stairwells where dust collected, steps that led to nowhere, halls that seemed to sigh when he pressed his hand against their walls. On one such stairwell, he stopped. The metal was cool beneath him as he sank down onto the steps. He was not alone. Another Morty sat there hunched, a sandwich balanced on his knees. This Morty was thinner, his clothes a little ragged, his expression sharp and weary, as though he had been asked to grow up too quickly. He glanced at the boy of two sons, then back at his sandwich. "You hungry?" the stranger asked, his voice flat, almost defensive. The boy shrugged. "Maybe." The other Morty broke the sandwich in half, handing the larger piece without hesitation. "Take it. It's just bread and cheese." "Nothing special," the boy accepted, surprised by the gesture. He bit into the sandwich. It was dry, a little stale but warm. He chewed slowly, savoring more than the taste, the quiet of eating beside someone else, the comfort of being offered something without condition. They ate in silence for a while, the sound of chewing mingling with the hum of the Citadel's pipes. The steps were cold, the lantern above them flickering as though listening in. Finally, the other Morty spoke. You're new here? Yes, the boy answered. I came from a place with 2 suns. The other, Morty, snorted, not unkindly. Figures. Everyone hears from somewhere strange. That's what makes us all the same. He wiped crumbs from his hands. But you don't act like the others. You don't scramble to keep up. You just sit. Like you're waiting for something. The boy tilted his head. Maybe I am. Waiting for what? He didn't answer. He didn't know how. The other Morty studied him for a moment, then shrugged. Doesn't matter. I'm Rickless. That's why I eat here. Nobody notices the Rickless ones. The boy frowned. Rickless? No Rick, no partner. No one claiming me. His tone was bitter but steady, like someone who had carried the weight for a long time. Most Mortys are dragged here by their Ricks, but some of us, we just end up here. We get forgotten. The boy of 2 suns thought of his own Rick, the ragged traveler who had first shown him the Citadel, who had said questions were more valuable than answers. That Rick had wandered off again, as Ricks always seemed to do, but the boy had never doubted he would return eventually. Hearing this Morty speak made him wonder if perhaps he should doubt. The 2 sat there until their sandwiches were gone, crumbs dusting their laps like pale stars. The boy broke the silence. Do you ever dream of doors? The Rickless Morty looked at him strangely. Doors? Yes, doors in the Citadel. Paths that lead somewhere else. A pause, then a quiet laugh. You're weirder than most. But maybe that's not bad. They sat a while longer. The lantern above them sputtered, then steadied. From that day on, the boy often returned to that stairwell. Sometimes the Rickless Morty was there, sometimes not. When he was, they shared food, bread, fruit, a piece of dried meat pilfered from the kitchens. When he wasn't, the boy still sat, his hands on the steps, listening to the hum of the Citadel beneath him. It was never about the food. It was about the pause, the quiet companionship, the unspoken understanding that 2 Mortys could exist side by side without needing to explain themselves fully. Once, on a particularly cold night, when the lamps burned dim, the Rickless Morty leaned close and whispered, Do you think the Citadel cares if we're here? The boy hesitated. I think it notices. I think it remembers. The other Morty looked at him long, as though weighing whether to believe. At last he nodded. If it remembers us, then we're not lost. Not completely. They did not speak of it again, but something between them had changed. The sandwich on the steps became a small ritual, a symbol. Not of survival, but of belonging. Of 2 forgotten shadows overlapping, even if only for a moment. Years later, when tales of the boy of 2 suns spread across the Citadel, some exaggerated his powers, his visions, his supposed destiny. Few remembered the simple truth, that he had once been given half of a sandwich on a stairwell, and that it had meant everything. For what is a bond if not the quiet offering of sustenance, a piece of oneself shared without demand? What is companionship if not the comfort of sitting side by side, crumbs falling like stars into the dust? Sometimes in dreams, Mortys across the Citadel claim to see them both. 2 figures sitting on forgotten steps, heads bent over shared food, lantern light flickering above. No words are spoken, just the warmth of presence and the soft reminder that no one is entirely Rickless if they have been remembered, even for a moment. And perhaps that is how the Citadel itself remembers, not in grand monuments, not in decrees or councils, but in the faint echo of a sandwich being broken in half and offered on the steps. There were rumors in the Citadel, rumors that floated through the air like dust motes in lamplight. They spoke not of power, nor inventions, nor battles, but of a whisper. Some said it drifted through the walls at night. Some said it belonged to the council itself, though no one had ever seen the council gather. Others claimed it was only the pipes, the endless machinery humming and groaning as it carried water and heat through the Citadel's bones. But the boy of 2 suns listened more deeply than most. And when he listened, he found the whisper was not just sound. It was a presence. It was the Citadel remembering itself. The first time he truly heard it, he had fallen asleep in the stairwell, where he sometimes shared bread with the Rickless Morty. The lantern burned low, its glow soft and uneven. He dreamed of walking down a hallway made of glass. His 2 shadows overlapped into one. And then, just before waking, he heard it. A voice without shape, a sound softer than breath, saying nothing and everything at once. He awoke with tears on his cheeks, The Rickless Morty, still awake, glanced at him. "Bad dream?" "No," the boy whispered. "Not bad, just deep." From then on he sought the whisper. He walked the Citadel at hours when most slept. He pressed his palms to the walls, leaned his ear against cold stone, closed his eyes to catch the faintest tremors of sound. The whisper was always there, patient, like an old song repeating beneath the louder noises of the world. And little by little, he noticed something else. Others listened too. Not many, but enough. A handful of Mortys, an occasional Rick, an old janitor sweeping dust in forgotten wings. Their eyes would glance toward him, recognizing the same secret hunger. It was one of these wanderers, a quiet Rick with a limp, who finally spoke to him. "You've heard it, haven't you?" The boy nodded. The Rick leaned on his broom, smiling faintly. "Then you've already been summoned." The boy frowned. "Summoned where?" "To the council. Not the one they write about in reports. The real one. The one that listens." And so began his journey into the council whisper. It was not a place, not really. It was a gathering that happened in many places, none marked, none recorded. Sometimes in an unused classroom, sometimes in the hollow beneath a broken stair, sometimes in a room so plain it looked invisible, even while you sat inside it. Those who gathered never spoke of it outside those walls. They came not to decide, but to share what the whisper had given them. The boys' first council was small. 6 figures sat in a circle, their lantern dim. For a long while no one said anything. The silence was thick, yet comforting, like a blanket laid over tired shoulders. Then an older Morty spoke, his voice unsteady. "Last night I dreamed of the Citadel singing, not loud, just humming to itself like a lullaby." The Rick with the limp nodded. "I've heard it too." Another Rick, her hair tangled and wild, added softly, "Sometimes when I build, I feel it guiding my hands. Not telling me what to make, only steadying me." As if saying, "You're not alone in this." The boy felt his chest tighten. He wanted to speak, but the words tangled. He pressed his palms together, trying to steady himself. At last he said quietly, "I think it notices us. The Citadel. I think it remembers." A hush followed. The others looked at him, not with surprise, but recognition. The Rick with the limp smiled again. "Yes, you hear it too." From then on he returned often. Not every day. Time moved strangely in the Citadel, and the council never met on a schedule, but enough. Each time he sat with them, he felt the whisper grow stronger, as though the Citadel itself leaned closer when they gathered. The whisper was not words, yet it carried meaning. Sometimes it brought memories, faces of forgotten Mortys, quiet acts of kindness, laughter lost in the endless halls. Sometimes it brought images, lanterns glowing where none had been lit, doors appearing in dreams, steps leading to nowhere that suddenly mattered. But most of all, the whisper brought stillness. A reminder that even in the noise of Rick's arguing, in the chaos of machines firing, in the endless movement of portals opening and closing, there was something beneath, a heartbeat. A hush. The boy carried it with him. When mocked by other Mortys, he breathed slowly and let the whisper hold him. When Ricks dismissed him, he pressed his hand to the nearest wall, listening until he remembered he was not forgotten. One night, after a particularly long council, the Rickless Morty asked him, "Why do you keep going there? What do you get from it?" The boy thought carefully. Then he answered, "It reminds me I am not only made of shadows. I am made of echoes too. And echoes mean someone somewhere once spoke." The Rickless Morty stared, then shook his head with a crooked smile. "You're strange, but I think I like that." And so the council grew, not in size but in depth. Each gathering deepened the listening. Each whisper carried further. Some claimed the Citadel itself grew gentler in their presence, that lanterns burned longer, that cracks in the walls softened, that air grew warmer. Whether true or not, those who listened believed. And belief in such a place was a kind of magic. Years later, legends of the Boy of Two Sons often skipped this chapter. They spoke of his wanderings, his disappearances, his strange wisdom. But few remembered the council where he sat with others, breathing in silence, hearing the Citadel hum like an ancient song. Yet if you walk the Citadel's halls at night, if you place your ear against the walls and wait, you may hear it still, the whisper of a council that never truly ended, a gathering not of rulers, not of inventors, but of listeners. And in that whisper, you may feel your own shadows soften, your own heart slow until the world feels less lonely. For the Citadel remembers, and when you listen, it remembers you too. In the Citadel, windows were rare. Most rooms were sealed, corridors endless, chambers lit by lanterns or artificial glow. Yet here and there, set high in forgotten towers or tucked along deserted stairwells, there were windows, thin, fragile sheets of glass opening not onto worlds, but onto silence. They looked out upon the drift of stars, the shimmer of endless black, and sometimes the faint green swirl of a distant portal flickering open and shut like a heartbeat. Few paid attention to these windows. Most Ricks moved too quickly, too consumed with invention or argument. Most Mortys walked with their heads down, weighed by chores or orders. But some lingered. Some stopped to look out as though waiting for something. These were the window watchers. The boy of two suns found them one night when sleep refused to hold him. He wandered higher than usual, climbing stair after stair until the air grew thinner, cooler. At last he reached a corridor where only 2 lanterns burned. Between them stretched a series of tall, narrow windows, each casting pale rectangles of starlight onto the floor. And in front of the windows sat figures, quiet, motionless, as though carved from stone. Some were Mortys, their silhouettes small and fragile. A few were Ricks, older ones mostly, their spines bent and their hands folded on their knees. None spoke. All simply gazed outward. The boy slowed his steps, hesitant. The silence here was deeper than silence elsewhere. It pressed against the skin, demanding reverence. He chose a place near the end of the corridor and sat cross-legged before a window, mimicking the others. The glass was cool against his palm. Beyond it stretched the infinite dark, stars like frozen sparks scattered on black silk. He thought he might feel fear, staring at such vast emptiness, but instead he felt something else. Smallness, yes, but not despair. It was the smallness of belonging to something immense. One of the Mortys shifted slightly, turning his head toward the boy. His eyes were tired but kind. He whispered, "First time?" The boy nodded. The Morty smiled faintly. "Then listen well. The stars tell more than you think." And so the boy listened. At first he heard only the usual hum of the Citadel, the groan of pipes, the sigh of air vents. But as his breathing slowed, as his gaze softened against the glass, another sound slipped through, the whisper, faint as always, yet stretched thinner here, as if it had traveled a great distance to meet him. Only now mingled with it came something new. The stars themselves seemed to pulse with rhythm like a choir far away. Hours passed, though it felt like only minutes. When at last he rose to leave, he felt as though he carried starlight in his chest. The next night he returned, and the night after that. Soon he began to notice patterns. The watchers never gathered in the same number, yet always at least a few were there, silent, faithful, waiting. Some brought small tokens, a cracked lens, a feather from an unknown bird, a strip of cloth stained with oil. They laid them on the floor before the windows as if offering them to the stars. The boy brought nothing at first, but one night he carried with him the sandwich crust the Rickless Morty had given him, what remained after their shared meal. He placed it gently on the cold stone beneath the window. For reasons he could not explain, it felt right. When he looked up again, he swore the stars burned brighter. The Rickless Morty teased him when he found out. "You gave a sandwich to space. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." The boy only smiled. Maybe space was hungry too. Yet in truth he had begun to understand. The offerings were not for the stars, not really. They were for the watchers themselves, small proofs that something mattered enough to be given away. A feather, a scrap, a crust of bread. Humble things, but heavy with meaning. As weeks passed, the boy grew closer to some of the watchers. He learned their quiet language, the way they tilted their heads toward certain constellations, the way they tapped fingers against glass to mark a rhythm only they could hear. He learned that many of them had once been restless, unable to sleep until the windows calmed them. He learned that some believed the stars were mirrors, reflecting not the outside but the inside, that to watch them was to watch oneself. One night, an old Rick sitting beside him whispered, "The stars are not far. They are here." He tapped his chest. "They live in the places we think are dark." The boy thought of his two sons, the shadows they cast, the loneliness of their doubling. And for the first time, he felt that even his strangeness might hold starlight. But the window watchers also carried sorrow. Some wept quietly as they stared. Others held their knees tight, as if afraid to fall into the void beyond the glass. The boy never asked why. He sensed that the windows did not only show beauty, they also showed longing. They reminded the watchers of what they had lost, or what they would never reach, and yet still they came. For even sorrow shared in silence could be a kind of comfort. One evening, as dawn approached and the lanterns burned low, the boy finally turned to the kind-eyed Morty, who had welcomed him his first night. "Why do you watch?" "Why do any of us?" The Morty's smile was tired, almost broken, yet true. "Because the stars don't lie. Everything else here, reports, orders, even memories can twist. But the stars, they shine the same for everyone. Even for us." The boy pressed his hand to the glass once more. The cold seeped into his skin, yet behind it warmth flickered. He imagined the stars not as distant fires, but as patient watchers themselves, gazing back, whispering, "We see you. We remember you. You are not lost." From then on, the boy became not just a listener, but a watcher. By day he wandered. By night he sat before windows, offering crumbs of his heart to the stars. Slowly the two roles blurred. Listening and watching became the same act. A quiet opening, a willingness to be seen and to see. And in the secret histories of the Citadel, this too would be forgotten. Rulers would not record the window watchers in their scrolls. They would write of experiments, of rebellions, of councils convened and shattered, but not of the quiet figures who sat before glass, staring outward until their eyes filled with stars. Yet still, if you walk those high corridors, if you press your palm to the cold window and let your breath slow, you may feel it. Not just the silence, not just the stars, but the company of countless watchers who sat before you, their gazes layered over yours, their hopes pressed into the glass. And perhaps then you will understand what the boy of two sons learned in that corridor, that watching itself can be prayer, that silence itself can be song, and that sometimes the greatest light comes not from what we reach, but from what we simply allow ourselves to see. There was a place in the Citadel where no one raised their voice, a place where footsteps softened without being asked, where even the clank of machinery seemed to hush itself. The boy of two sons found it not through maps or directions, but by following a faint smell, something strange and forgotten, the smell of paper. It was tucked in the far underbelly of the Citadel, past long bridges and crooked stairs, behind a door without a handle. The boy thought at first it was locked, but when he pressed his palm against the metal, the door sighed open. Inside waited a space unlike any other in the Citadel, a vast hall stacked with shelves upon shelves of books, journals, scrolls, even scraps of torn paper pressed between shards of glass. It was called the Morty Library. The air was different here, dry, warm, and filled with the faint sweet dust of aging words. The ceilings stretched into shadow, too high to see. Lanterns glowed from crooked poles, their light golden instead of the Citadel's usual sterile white. The silence was not empty. It was thick, like a woven blanket, and everywhere Mortys moved softly between shelves. Some carried stacks of journals, their arms trembling under the weight. Others hunched over desks, scribbling by lantern light. A few simply sat cross-legged on the floor, whispering passages aloud as though afraid the words would vanish if left unspoken. At the center sat an old Morty, with spectacles too large for his face. His hair had thinned, his clothes hung loose, yet his eyes were alive, darting from text to text with quiet devotion. He was the archivist, keeper of the Morty Library. When the boy of two sons entered, the archivist did not look up. He merely said, "Find your shelf, child. Every Morty has one." The boy frowned, confused, but as he wandered deeper, he noticed something strange. The shelves were not arranged alphabetically, nor by subject, nor even by time. Instead, each shelf carried a subtle hum, like the faintest string of a harp. When the boy paused before one particular row, the hum rose, gentle and clear, as if greeting him. There, on the shelf, lay journals with cracked spines and worn edges. The boy pulled one free. Its cover was soft, its pages filled with shaky handwriting. He began to read. The words were not about inventions or battles. They were about days, about waking up, about carrying trays, fixing leaks, waiting in corridors, about fears whispered to no one, about dreams quickly forgotten. The boy realized he was reading a Morty's diary, He returned the book, took another, then another. Each was different yet the same. Some Mortys wrote about ricks they served, cruel, absent, or rarely kind. Some wrote about hunger or loneliness or moments of unexpected joy, a sandwich shared, a star glimpsed through a vent, a joke whispered that made them laugh until their ribs hurt. The boy's chest ached as he read. These were not the stories the council kept. These were not the records anyone praised. They were the soft truths of lives that otherwise vanished without a trace. When at last he returned to the archivist, he asked in a whisper, "Why keep all this? Why save so many words?" The old Morty looked up, his eyes gentle behind heavy lenses. "Because without them, we disappear twice, once in life and once in memory. This library says we were here, we felt, we mattered." The boy nodded slowly. He thought of the windows, of the whispers, of the sandwich offered to stars. He thought of how easy it was to be forgotten in a place so vast. From then on he visited often. He did not always read. Sometimes he only walked the aisles, listening to the hum of shelves, feeling the weight of countless lives pressing gently around him. Sometimes he copied a line onto scraps of paper to carry with him like a charm. "I dreamed I was flying, and for once no one told me to stop. Even if I am small, my shadow is still long when the sun is low." One evening the archivist handed him a blank journal. The cover was simple, unmarked. "Your shelf waits," he said. The boy hesitated. "But I don't know what to write." The archivist's smile was faint, almost invisible, but true. "Begin with what you remember, end with what you hope." So the boy began. He wrote of his two sons. He wrote of the corridors, the whispers, the sandwich on the steps, the window watchers. He wrote of the strange weight of being both small and seen. His words stumbled at first, clumsy and uneven, but with time they grew steadier. He did not write for anyone else, not for the council, not even for the archivist. He wrote because the paper did not judge and because something inside him wanted to leave a trace. The Morty Library became a refuge. When the Citadel grew too loud, when the council's whispers weighed heavy, when loneliness swelled like a tide, the boy returned here. The shelves did not ask him to prove himself. They only asked him to listen. Over time he noticed something else. The Mortys who spent long hours here seemed lighter, not in body but in spirit. Their steps were softer, their gazes clearer. They carried stories like lanterns, illuminating corners otherwise lost to shadow. One of them, a girl Morty with ink-stained fingers, once told him, "When you read another Morty's words, you carry them with you. And when you carry enough, you're never really alone." The boy carried her words too, yet the Morty Library was fragile. Its pages could be torn, its shelves burned, its halls sealed away. The boy sometimes wondered how long it would survive, but the archivist never seemed afraid. "Libraries," he said, "do not live in wood and paper. They live in those who remember." And so the boy remembered. He remembered the faint hum of his shelf, the weight of journals in his hands, the dust that shimmered in lantern light. He remembered the feeling of reading words so ordinary they became extraordinary. He remembered the sense that even in the vast silence of the Citadel, countless voices breathed just beneath the surface, waiting to be heard. And perhaps you too, drifting toward sleep, can feel the truth of it, that every life, no matter how small, leaves echoes worth keeping, that even in forgotten halls, even on torn pages, there lingers the pulse of being alive. So the boy of two sons became not only a watcher, not only a listener, but a keeper too, carrying words like seeds, planting them softly wherever he walked, so that one day, long after even the Citadel itself faded, the stories of Mortys would still bloom in the quiet corners of memory. In the Citadel, most lessons were loud. They came in the form of orders barked by impatient ricks, experiments rushed without pause, or punishments disguised as instruction. Knowledge here was something extracted, not something shared. But there was one room, small, hidden and forgotten by most, where teaching was different. The boy of two sons found it by accident. He had been chasing the faint echo of the Citadel's whisper through winding halls when he came upon a wooden door, oddly worn compared to the steel around it. He pushed it open and discovered a classroom. It was not large. 10 desks faced a chalkboard, the surface smeared grey with half-erased words. Shelves sagged beneath piles of paper, cracked rulers, and broken globes. Dust hung in the air, softening the light that filtered from a single high window. And at the front sat a Morty, not a child but not old either. His hair was neat, his eyes patient. He wore no council badge, no marks of rank. When he looked up and saw the boy, he smiled with the quiet surprise of someone who has been waiting a very long time. "Daji," the Morty said softly, "you came—" The boy frowned. "I wasn't looking for you." The teacher chuckled. "No one ever is. That's how they find me." He gestured to the desks. The boy hesitated, then sat. The chair wobbled slightly, as though unused for years. The teacher folded his hands. "I have no curriculum, no lessons approved by Rix. All I have is time and patience, 2 things this Citadel rarely gives. But if you're willing, I will wait with you, and we will learn together." The boy tilted his head. "Wait for what?" The teacher's smile deepened, though sadness flickered behind it. "For understanding. For the kind that does not rush. For the kind that blooms slowly, like dawn." From that day, the boy returned often. Sometimes he asked questions. Why did the Citadel hum? Why did some Mortys vanish? Why did stars seem closer at the windows? The teacher never gave quick answers. Instead, he asked, "What do you think?" Or "How does it feel when you sit with that question?" Other times they sat in silence. The boy would doodle shapes on scraps of paper, while the teacher traced circles on the chalkboard, not writing words, just letting his hand move. It was strange, but not unpleasant. The boy began to understand that learning was not always about answers. It was also about waiting inside the question. One evening the boy grew restless. "Why do you stay here? Why not leave like others do?" The teacher's gaze softened. "Because leaving is easy. Waiting is harder. Someone must be here when the lost wander in. Someone must hold open a chair even if it gathers dust. I wait, because one student who truly listens is worth more than 1,000 who rush past." The boy thought about this for a long time. Over the weeks, he noticed little things. The teacher's patience was not passive, it was alive. When the boy grew frustrated, the teacher did not scold. He only said, "Take your time." When the boy grew tired, the teacher dimmed the lantern and let silence teach instead. When the boy laughed, the teacher laughed too, with a sound that seemed to echo against the very walls, as if even the classroom itself had missed laughter. One night the boy asked, "Who taught you?" The teacher's eyes grew distant. "Once, long ago, a Rick who was different." He spoke slowly. He listened. "He told me that the universe was not built only for answers. It was also built for wonder. When he was gone, I realized someone must keep that alive. So I became a teacher, and I wait." The boy did not know what to say, but he felt something stir inside him, as if the words were seeds falling into unseen soil. Sometimes other Mortys wandered in, curious. A few stayed a day or two, but most drifted away, impatient for quicker knowledge. The teacher never stopped them. He only bowed his head gently, as if blessing their journey. "They will return if they are meant to," he once told the boy. "Patience is a door. Not everyone is ready to walk through." The boy began to realize that waiting itself was a kind of courage. In a world where everything was hurried, measured, and consumed, to pause was an act of quiet rebellion. One lesson stayed with him above all. The teacher had written nothing on the board that day, only drawn a single circle. "What does it mean?" the boy asked. The teacher tapped the chalk gently against the circle's edge. "It means what it always means. Everything ends where it begins. But it also means this: patience has no end. You can leave it and return, and it will still be here waiting. Like me." The boy stared at the circle until the lines blurred, until it seemed less like chalk and more like light. He thought of the Morty library, of journals that kept voices alive. He thought of the window watchers, of stars that whispered through silence. And he realized that waiting, too, was a form of remembering, of holding space for something unseen, until it was ready to appear. Years later, when the boy wandered other halls, he would still think of the teacher who waited. He would remember the wobbling desk, the chalk-smudged board, the quiet patience that asked nothing yet gave everything, and sometimes when he found himself restless, he would close his eyes, And imagine sitting again in that small classroom, the teacher's calm voice saying, "Take your time. Understanding will find you when you are ready." It was not a lesson written in books, nor one shouted in council chambers. It was the gentlest of lessons, and because of that it endured. And somewhere still, perhaps in a forgotten corridor of the Citadel, a small classroom waits. Dust gathers, the chalk grows short, but the teacher remains, quiet, steady, unhurried, waiting as always. For the truth is simple, though we rarely believe it. Sometimes the greatest teacher does not chase us, nor lecture us, nor demand we keep pace. Sometimes the greatest teacher only waits, because waiting itself is love. Deep beneath the Citadel, far below the corridors of glass and iron, there was a place that smelled nothing like machines. The air there carried the fragrance of damp soil, of roots, of leaves stretching unseen toward light. Few knew of it. Fewer still believed it was real. They called it the garden beneath the towers. The boy of 2 sons found it when following a dripping pipe down into the foundations. The pipe led him through narrow shafts and crooked tunnels until the stone walls widened into a cavern. And there it was, a hidden world of green. The first thing he noticed was the sound, soft, alive, like breathing, the rustle of leaves, the steady drip of water into pools, the faint hum of unseen insects. Compared to the Citadel's metallic echoes, this place sounded like a lullaby. Light fell strangely here, not from lanterns or stars, but from bulbs grown like fruit on vines that curled high along the cavern's ceiling. They glowed faintly blue, casting gentle halos over everything. Under their radiance spread rows of plants, some familiar, some strange. Stalks heavy with fruit, trees with pale bark, flowers that opened and closed in rhythm with the dripping water. As if they too were listening, and among them walked Mortys. They moved slowly, tenderly, carrying baskets woven from reeds, hands stained with soil. None wore uniforms or badges. Their clothes were patched, their shoes worn thin. Yet their faces were calm in a way the boy had never seen in the Citadel above. Their gazes were not hurried, not fearful. They looked at each plant as if it were alive with secrets, and perhaps it was. One of them noticed the boy. She was small, hair tied back, her hands filled with seeds. She smiled as though she had expected him. "You found us," she said softly. The boy hesitated. "What is this place?" "The part of the Citadel that still remembers how to grow," she answered. "The towers rise above, but their roots are here." She placed a few seeds into his palm. They were tiny, nearly weightless. "Everything begins this small," she whispered. "Even towers." The boy stayed. Day after day he returned to the garden. He learned to water the plants with careful hands, to scatter seeds where the soil was rich, to prune branches so light could reach hidden leaves. He learned that each plant had its own rhythm. Some demanded patience, sprouting only after weeks of silence. Others bloomed quickly, fragile but bright like sparks. The Mortys who tended the garden spoke little, yet their silence was not empty. It was steady, like the teacher's silence in the forgotten classroom, or the quiet of the window watchers staring at stars. A silence that taught without words. One evening, while pulling weeds, the boy asked, "Why hide this? Why not show the council? They'd see its worth." An older Morty shook his head. "The council measures worth in numbers, in usefulness. They'd turn the garden into crops for trade, strip it bare, claim it for themselves. No, this place is not for them. It is for us, for Mortys who need something gentle, something alive." The boy thought of the Morty library, the fragile journals filled with soft truths. He thought of how easily the council might erase them too. And he understood. Some things had to remain hidden to survive. There was a ritual in the garden. Each time a plant bore fruit, the first piece was not eaten. It was placed in the soil, buried as an offering. "To remind the plant we are grateful," the girl explained. "To remind ourselves that giving must come before taking." The boy followed the ritual with reverence. When he tasted the fruit that came after, sweet, sharp, alive, he felt as though he was tasting not only food but memory, patience, and quiet care. The garden changed him. Above, in the Citadel, everything was built to endure coldness. Walls of iron, laws of order, routines that left no space for wonder. But here things grew fragile first, then strong. A seed cracked open, vulnerable, then stretched into stem and leaf and finally into strength. Growth here was not about control. It was about trust. One night, as he lay in the soil beneath the glowing vines, the boy whispered, "What if I, too, am a seed?" The thought made him tremble, not with fear but with possibility. The Mortys of the garden never laughed at him. They only nodded as though they had all asked the same question once. He began to dream differently, not of towers and corridors, but of branches climbing skyward, of roots digging deep. In his dreams, he did not wander alone, he grew. The girl who had first given him seeds once told him, "The towers look unshakable, but without us, they would wither. They rise because we remain beneath, unseen, holding the roots." The boy thought of his two sons, of shadows that stretched and bent. He realized that perhaps his strangeness was not a curse, but a kind of soil, rich, fertile, waiting to grow something unexpected. The garden beneath the towers was not in any record, not in any council archive. Yet it lived, carried by Mortys who knew that survival alone was not enough. To live was to grow, to nurture, to plant seeds even if you might never see them bloom. And so, hidden deep in the foundations, life continued to hum. Leaves unfolded, roots thickened, the glow fruit dimmed and brightened with the rhythm of unseen hours, and the boy of two sons watered his small corner, feeling as though each drop carried a promise, that even in iron, even in shadow, something tender could still take root. If you listen closely, drifting towards sleep, perhaps you can hear it too. The soft rustle of unseen leaves, the hush of roots curling deeper, a reminder that beneath every tower, no matter how cold, there may lie a hidden garden, waiting quietly, patiently for hands willing to tend it. Not all stories in the Citadel belonged to Mortys. Some, rarely spoken aloud, belonged to Ricks who wandered too far from what it meant to be a Rick. The boy of two sons first heard of him in fragments, half-jokes whispered in corridors, warnings passed like shadows. They called him the Rick who did not belong. No one agreed on his crime. Some said he had refused to invent, refused to tinker, refused to drown himself in the endless spiral of experiments. Others claimed he had been too gentle with his Morty, treating him not as a tool but as a son. Still others whispered of stranger heresies, that he had stared too long into the void of universes, and decided that arrogance was nothing but fear dressed in louder clothes. Whatever the truth, this Rick had stepped outside the shape expected of him. And in the Citadel, that was the deepest crime. The boy did not expect to find him. Yet one evening, wandering through a forgotten stairwell that smelled faintly of rust, he heard a voice humming. The sound was not sharp, not filled with equations. It was soft, tuneless, absent-minded. Like someone mending, not destroying. He followed it into a chamber with no windows. There sat a Rick. His hair was greyed more than most, his coat patched with clumsy stitches. Instead of tools, he held thread and needle, repairing a torn sleeve. His eyes lifted to the boy's, and they were not sharp, not cynical. They were tired but kind. "You're not lost," the Rick said, as though he knew. "You're searching." The boy stepped closer. "Are you the one they whisper about?" The Rick chuckled, low and without bitterness. "They whisper because they cannot understand. They think I broke. But no, I simply stopped pretending." He set down the coat and gestured to a chair, old and crooked. The boy sat, the air heavy with dust but strangely warm. "Do you know what it means to be a Rick?" the older man asked. The boy hesitated. He had heard enough to recite genius, invention, defiance, survival through intellect. But none of the words felt true in this moment. The Rick leaned back. "It means to never belong, to stand apart." But somewhere along the way they made that into a cage, a performance. All these Ricks competing, outsmarting, proving themselves. So it's not freedom. It's another prison, only with equations scratched on the walls. His voice softened. "I stopped playing. That's why they hate me." The boy thought of the Morty library, hidden so the council could not burn it. He thought of the garden, growing quietly beneath iron towers. Now he saw the same truth in this Rick. The truth that sometimes the greatest rebellion was simply to refuse the script. "Do you miss it?" the boy asked. "The science, the inventions?" The Rick smiled faintly. "You don't stop being a Rick by laying down your tools. You stop being a Rick when the tools own you. I build still, but not machines to conquer. I build smaller things, softer things." He reached into the shadows and drew out a wooden box. It was plain, hand-carved, its edges uneven. He opened it to reveal not gadgets but seeds, different from those in the garden, round and smooth, painted faintly with color. "They are toys," he said. "Seeds that hum when you hold them. They won't save universes. They won't impress councils. But they make Mortys laugh." The boy held one. It vibrated faintly in his hand, buzzing like a small heart. And against his will, he smiled. The Rick watched him. "That's why I don't belong. Because somewhere along the way, laughter stopped being valuable. And I couldn't accept that." The boy returned to him many nights. Sometimes the Rick told stories of his younger years, filled with fire and arrogance. Sometimes he sat in silence, teaching the boy to carve wood, to thread needles, to make things that held not power but care. The Rick never asked who the boy was, nor where he came from. Perhaps he already knew. Or perhaps in his exile, names and origins mattered less than the fact that someone was willing to sit and listen. Once the boy asked, "Do you ever wish to return? To be part of them again?" The Rick's hand stilled on the wood. For a long time he said nothing. Then, "To return would mean to break myself into their shape. No, I would rather be forgotten in honesty than remembered in a lie." The words struck deep. The boy realized then that belonging was not always a place. It was a shape one carried inside. Sometimes that shape did not fit anywhere, and the courage was not in bending to fit, but in remaining whole even in solitude. One night, as the boy prepared to leave, the Rick pressed the wooden box into his hands. "Take it," he said. "Not for the council, not for any tower. Keep it for yourself, or for another who needs it. Remember that even Ricks can make something tender." The boy wanted to refuse. It felt too much, too precious. But the Rick's gaze was steady, and so he accepted. The seeds inside hummed faintly like hidden music. When he left the chamber, he glanced back once. The Rick was humming again, mending another torn coat, content in his exile. And for the first time, the boy understood that sometimes exile was not loss, but freedom, the kind of freedom the Citadel could never script or cage. As he walked the dark stairwells back toward the Citadel's louder corridors, the boy thought of the garden's roots, the library's fragile pages, and now the Rick who had chosen not to belong. Perhaps, he thought, the Citadel was not a single place at all. Perhaps it was made of fragments, hidden and overlooked, each carrying its own truth. And perhaps he too did not need to belong to the shape they demanded. Perhaps he only needed to belong to the seeds he carried, to the silences he kept, to the strange suns that rose and set within him. And so he walked on, the wooden box pressed close, listening to the faint hum of seeds, as if they were whispering that not belonging was also a kind of belonging, one that no counsel could erase. There are things spoken in daylight, loud and sharp, and then there are the truths that live only in the hush between sleep and waking. The boy of two sons came to know that some of the most important stories were never told in words at all. They were woven in dreams, stitched quietly across shared nights. He did not know when it began. Perhaps it was in the garden beneath the towers, when the air smelled of soil and quiet patience. Perhaps it was in the Morty library, where forgotten voices leaned into his thoughts like candlelight. Or perhaps it was when the Rick who did not belong had placed a humming seed in his palm, leaving him awake long into the night, wondering if it was truly alive. But soon the boy discovered that as he drifted into sleep, he was not alone. At first it was faint, a shadow at the edge of dream, a laughter that was not his. Then, like a tide pulling him deeper, he felt another presence, tender, uncertain, but steady. It was a Morty. He could not say which one, for in dreams faces blurred and names scattered. But it was always a Morty, another child who carried the same longing, the same ache for a world that would not see them fully. They met often in a dream of endless hallways. The walls stretched forever, but they were painted with shifting skies. Sometimes dawn, sometimes dusk, sometimes the strange twin suns that belonged only to the boy. They walked together, never hurrying, speaking softly. "What's it like where you are?" the other Morty asked one night. His voice was quiet, as though afraid the dream itself would crumble if he spoke too loudly. "It's heavy," the boy answered, "like the walls pressed down. But there are cracks, and through them sometimes I see light." The Morty nodded, and for a moment their steps were the same. Some nights they found themselves sitting on the steps of a Citadel tower, eating sandwiches that never crumbled, no matter how long they held them. Other nights they sat in a field of glass flowers that chimed whenever the wind moved. Once, They stood at a window so tall it seemed to gaze over infinite stars. Each dream was different, yet threaded by the same warmth, the knowledge that neither of them was alone in their searching. The boy asked once, "Why do we meet here in dreams?" The Morty tilted his head, eyes reflecting some star that didn't exist. "Maybe because the Council can't reach us here. Maybe because dreams are the only place big enough for Mortys to matter." The boy felt those words settle deep in him, like stones dropped into still water. It wasn't only the two of them either. Some nights he felt the presence of others, faint outlines drifting further away in the dream hallways. Sometimes he heard laughter, or soft crying, or the murmur of voices half-formed. It was as if, across the Citadel, other Mortys were also walking those hidden corridors of sleep, brushing shoulders with each other in ways the waking world would not allow. Shared dreams became shared nights, and with them came a quiet comfort, the kind that did not erase loneliness, but softened its edges. He began to look forward to sleep, not as an escape, but as a doorway. Each night he carried with him the wooden box from the Rick who did not belong, the memory of the garden, the whispers of the library. And in dreams he offered them to the Morty who walked beside him, as though to say, "See, you are not the only one carrying strange treasures." One night, the Morty handed him something in return, a shard of glass glowing faintly blue. "It isn't much," he said, "but when I touch it, it hums, like it wants to be more than it is." The boy held it, and for a moment the shard and the seed hummed together, as though answering one another across the fragile space of the dream. The boy laughed softly. "They're talking. Maybe they're just like us," the Morty whispered, trying to find where they belong. It was then the boy realized that dreams were not less real for being dreams. They left marks invisible but lasting, the way certain lullabies lingered long after the notes faded. Some nights their dreams turned heavier. The Morty would confess, "Sometimes I feel like I'm just waiting to be useful, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be let go." The boy listened, his heart aching with recognition. "Me too," he said, "but maybe waiting together is different." And the Morty smiled, tired but grateful. The boy began to think of these nights as secret gardens, places no council could uproot. He wondered how many Mortys across the Citadel carried such gardens within, unseen, dreaming the same hidden corridors. If the Citadel was built of towers and councils and commands, perhaps it was also built of these dreams, soft, unrecorded, alive only in the minds of children who dared to hope. One night, just before dawn, the Morty turned to him and said, "Promise me something." "What?" "Promise that if you ever find a way out of here, you'll carry me with you. Not my body, just me. The me that walks here with you." The boy nodded slowly. "I promise." The dream faded then, as all dreams must. But the promise clung like a thread tied tight. As days passed in the waking Citadel, the boy noticed changes. He carried himself with a quieter steadiness, as though the dreams gave him roots. He found himself listening more, even in silence. When others laughed at Mortys for their fumbling, he did not laugh. He only remembered the one who walked with him, the one who had given him a glowing shard, shared dreams, shared nights. He understood now that loneliness was never total, that somewhere, someone else was awake in the same longing, and when they found each other even in dreams, they wove something stronger than walls, stronger than silence. The boy of two sons slept often, but he no longer feared the weight of his eyelids. Sleep was not an absence, but a gathering, and each time he closed his eyes, he whispered into the hush, "I'll see you in the halls. I'll see you in the stars. I'll see you in the dream where we belong." And every time he did. It was said quietly and without certainty that the Citadel had once been built in a single night. The Ricks told it like a myth, as if genius could spring whole from the void. But the Mortys knew better. For them, days stretched long and unchanging, each one folding into the next like identical bricks stacked without end. And so, when the announcement came that there would be a festival, the first the Citadel had ever known, it was met with disbelief. The council claimed it was to honor unity, to prove that Ricks and Mortys alike could share in joy. But even in celebration, the Citadel could not help but show its hand. Banners were hung in precise lines, their colors muted, chosen less for beauty than for symmetry. Lights were strung across walkways, not to sparkle but to measure distance evenly. Music was permitted, but only in rhythms predictable enough to march to. Still, the Mortys whispered, "It is something." Even imitation joy was better than none. The boy of two sons watched as the Citadel prepared. Stalls appeared along corridors where no stalls had ever been. They sold food shaped like inventions, Morty-sized masks of famous ricks, and trinkets designed to amuse without offending. In the central plaza, a great stage was erected, where speeches would be given and songs performed. The boy wandered among the growing spectacle, his wooden box of humming seeds hidden beneath his coat. He felt the hum faintly against his ribs, as though reminding him that real celebration came not from banners or speeches, but from the small living things no council could measure. When the festival began, the towers glowed with lantern light. For once laughter echoed freely, though always watched by the eyes of guards. Mortys ran between the stalls, clutching paper stars that crumpled easily but shone under the lanterns. Even ricks, though careful to appear unimpressed, allowed themselves to taste sweet cakes or sip glowing drinks that turned their tongues briefly blue. The boy found himself drawn to the steps of the plaza stage, where music rose above the crowd. It was clumsy, imperfect. A group of Mortys had been allowed to play. Their instruments were mismatched, their timing off, but there was something raw in it, something that pulsed more alive than the council had planned. Some of the crowd frowned. Others, especially the Mortys, smiled wide. The boy sat on the steps eating a sandwich bought with borrowed credits. Around him, Mortys whispered their dreams of what festivals should be. Skies filled with real fireworks, food that never ended, dances that spun until dawn. "They'll never let us have that," one Morty sighed. "Maybe not here," the boy said quietly. "But that doesn't mean it isn't real." The Morty looked at him, puzzled, but then smiled as if the boy's words had tugged at some thread of hope. Later, the council appeared on the stage, their voices booming with speeches about unity, order, and the genius of Ricks. The crowd clapped on cue, though the applause was hollow. The boy could see the Morty's eyes drifting. Their attention caught more by the lanterns than the words, and then in the lull after a speech, something small happened, something the council had not planned. From somewhere in the crowd, a Morty began to sing. It was not loud, not polished, just a simple lullaby, half forgotten. Others recognized it. One by one, Mortys joined in, their voices uneven, weaving through each other like threads of an old fabric. The song carried no rebellion, no fire. It was simply gentle, the kind of melody hummed before sleep. Yet in that moment, the plaza changed. The lights seemed softer, the air warmer. Even some Ricks stopped to listen, their stern faces loosening as though remembering something buried deep. The council shifted uneasily, but the song was too quiet to condemn, too innocent to silence. The boy listened, his heart swelling. He thought of the shared dreams, the hallways painted with shifting skies. He thought of the garden, the library, the Rick who did not belong. All of it was here, in the voices of Mortys singing into the night. He felt the box at his ribs hum in response, as though the seeds themselves were singing too. The festival went on. There were contests of invention where Ricks displayed machines, but the Mortys gathered around their own contests. Paper folding, pebble tossing, small acts of play that needed no applause. There were stalls where Mortys painted each other's faces with borrowed colors, laughing at the crooked lines. The boy carried these moments like treasures. Not the speeches, not the symmetry, but the laughter, the crookedness, the songs sung off-key. These were the real festival, hidden inside the false one. As the night deepened, the lanterns dimmed and the music softened. Mortys curled on the steps, their paper stars crushed in their hands, drifting into sleep under towers that never slept. The boy remained awake, watching. He wondered if, in their dreams, they would meet again in those endless hallways, carrying the festival with them. He imagined a dream where the council's speeches turned into rivers, flowing harmlessly away, where the lanterns floated into the sky and became stars, where the Mortys' lullaby echoed forever, never silenced. And perhaps he thought that was the true meaning of the Citadel's first festival. Not the show on the stage, not the order forced upon them, but the small things no council could script. A lullaby, a crooked painted face, a hum in the ribs of a boy carrying seeds. As he closed his eyes beneath the lantern light, he whispered to himself, "Even here joy grows. Even here dreams find each other." And with that thought, the boy of two sons drifted into sleep, the festival lingering like a gentle aftertaste, soft as bread, warm as memory. In the Citadel, every table was full. The canteens buzzed with voices, the laboratories clattered with tools, the council halls thundered with arguments. Yet the boy of 2 sons came to learn that the most powerful presence was not always in the noise, but in the silence of an empty chair. It was during one of the Citadel's long meals, a hall lined with rows of identical tables, each stacked with trays of food, designed more for efficiency than taste. Sandwiches wrapped in wax, soups that steamed without flavor, bread that filled the stomach without ever feeling like home. The boy sat among other Mortys, their voices quick and overlapping, trying to stretch the thin thread of joy that meals allowed. Yet his eyes kept wandering to a table near the edge of the hall. At it sat a group of Mortys, their shoulders close, their laughter rising and falling like waves. But at the center of their table, one chair was always empty. He asked about it once in a whisper. The Morty beside him shook his head quickly, eyes darting to make sure no Rick had overheard. "Don't ask too loud," he muttered. "It belonged to someone who isn't here anymore." The boy tilted his head. "Where did he go?" The Morty's lips pressed tight. "They say he slipped away, or was taken, or maybe he found a way out." He looked back at the empty chair. "We keep it for him just in case." And so the boy began to watch. Meal after meal, that chair remained untouched. No one sat there, not even by accident. Mortys would shift their trays, squeeze tighter, stand if needed, but the chair was never filled. It held a quiet reverence, like a candle that burned without flame. Sometimes, one of the Mortys would set a small piece of food there, a crust of bread, a folded wrapper, a slice of fruit saved from their tray. Other times, they would pause in their laughter, glance at the chair and then smile again, as though the one who was missing had just spoken. The boy asked another Morty, this one older with tired eyes, "Why do you keep it empty?" The older Morty shrugged, but his voice trembled. "Because it reminds us. Because it says he mattered. Because even if they erase him from the Citadel, they can't erase him from this table." The boy carried those words with him long after the meal ended. He began to dream of the empty chair. In dreams it was not wood and steel, but light, glowing faintly. Sometimes he saw a shadow seated there, smiling. Sometimes the chair itself hummed, like the seeds in his box, carrying a presence that could not be explained. And slowly the boy understood. The empty chair was not a wound, but a lantern. It reminded the Mortys that absence could be as powerful as presence. That memory, carried together, was a kind of defiance. One night, he asked the Morty who shared his dreams, the one who walked with him in endless hallways, about it. "There's an empty chair at a table here," the boy said softly. "No one sits there. They say it belonged to someone who left." The dream Morty nodded, his eyes steady. "Every table has one if you look long enough. Some are obvious, some are hidden. But there's always a space left by someone who refused to be what they were told to be. The council hates that, you know. They hate empty chairs, because an empty chair means a Morty might have mattered enough to be missed." The boy felt a shiver of truth in those words. Days passed, and he began to notice empty chairs everywhere. A gap in a study hall, a missing seat in a classroom, a space at the back of an assembly. They were small, easily overlooked, but once he saw them, he could not unsee them. Each one hummed with quiet defiance, like a heartbeat hidden beneath the noise. One evening, as he sat again near the Mortys with their guarded chair, he reached into his coat and pulled out one of the humming seeds. Without a word, he placed it gently on the empty tray before the chair. The Mortys around him went silent. They stared at the seed, at the boy, at each other, and then one of them smiled. "Yeah," he whispered. "He'd like that." The seed buzzed faintly, as if alive. And for a moment, the absence at the table felt less like loss, more like a promise. From then on, the Mortys left small tokens on the chair, folded notes, bits of cloth, broken pencils, anything that could carry a trace of care. It became a quiet ritual, a way of saying, "You were here. You are still here." The boy never asked again who the missing Morty was. Perhaps it was better that way. Perhaps the chair belonged not just to one, but to all who had been lost, all who had slipped through the cracks of the Citadel. He only knew that when he closed his eyes at night, he could feel the hum of the seed and the weight of the chair. And together they whispered, "Absence is also a presence. Silence is also a story." And in the hush between waking and sleep, The boy of two sons promised himself he would remember, not just the ones who remained, but also the ones who had gone, their chairs left empty, their memory alive in the smallest offerings of bread, wrappers, seeds. The Citadel could fill its halls with noise, but it could not silence the language of empty chairs. In the Citadel, questions were currency. Rick spent them freely, tossing them into the air like sparks. What if? How does this work? Can it be bigger, faster, sharper? Mortis, on the other hand, were not expected to ask. They were to nod, to fetch, to follow. Their silence was part of the design. But silence is fragile, and one day a Morty broke it. The boy of two sons first noticed him in a classroom. The walls were painted in dull colors, meant to discourage distraction. The desks lined in neat rows. Rick stood at the front, drawing equations so dense they looked like tangles of roots. Morty scribbled, most without understanding, their eyes glazed but obedient. Then from the middle row a voice rose. Why? It was not shouted. It was not defiant. It was soft, almost curious. Yet in the silence that followed, it rang louder than any alarm. The Rick froze, chalk mid-air. Mortys turned their heads wide-eyed. The boy felt his chest tighten. The Morty who had spoken sat calmly, pencil between his fingers. His face was plain, unremarkable, and yet his question hovered like a spark refusing to die. Why? He repeated. Why do we have to learn this formula if we'll never use it? Why do Mortys sit in rows while Ricks stand at the front? Why does it always have to be this way? The Rick's face hardened. He cleared his throat, tried to laugh it off, but the laugh was too thin. Mortys don't ask questions like that, he said, chalk striking the board again. Mortys observe. Mortys absorb. That is how the Citadel works, but the damage was done. The question had been asked and it hung in the air like smoke. After class, whispers spread like cracks in glass. Some Mortys were frightened, others were angry, warning that the council would punish him. But a few, just a few, looked brighter, as though the question had lit something inside them. The boy found him later, sitting alone on the steps outside, tracing circles in the dust with his shoe. You asked why, the boy said softly. The Morty looked up, unashamed. Someone had to. The boy sat beside him. Aren't you afraid? Of course, the Morty said. But being afraid and being silent aren't the same thing. He picked up a pebble, held it up to the light. All I want to know is, why is everything already decided for us? Why can't we decide anything ourselves? The boy thought of the empty chair at a table, of the Rick who did not belong, of the garden's roots, the library's whispers, the dream hallways where Mortys met unseen. Each of them, in their way, had also asked why, but none had spoken it so plainly, so dangerously. Do you think you'll get an answer? The boy asked. The Morty smiled faintly. I don't think the council has one. That's why they don't want us to ask. The boy felt a strange warmth in his chest, both fear and admiration. In the days that followed, the Morty's question echoed. He asked it again in small ways. When food was portioned unequally, he asked, why more for Ricks, less for Mortys? When assemblies dragged on with speeches about obedience, he whispered, why must it always be obedience? When punishments were handed out, he murmured, why punishment, not mercy? Sometimes he was silenced quickly. Sometimes he was ignored. But always the question remained, like a seed lodged in the cracks of stone. Other Mortys began to echo him, timidly at first. Why is it like this? Why can't it change? Why can't Mortys be more than shadows? The Citadel grew uneasy. Ricks frowned. Guards watched more closely. And the boy of two sons carried the question with him into his dreams. There in the endless hallways, he told his dream companion about the Morty who asked why. The other Morty smiled. I've heard of him, he said, though how he had heard the boy could not know. Every Citadel has one. A Morty who asks the question out loud. Sometimes they disappear. Sometimes they're punished. But always another appears. Because the question doesn't belong to just one of us. It belongs to all of us. The boy felt a shiver then, not of fear but of awe. The Morty who asked why was not just a child in a classroom. He was a voice carried through time, passed from Morty to Morty, a flame that flickered but never went out. One evening the boy sought him again. He found him on a quiet balcony, staring at the stars that pressed against the Citadel's glass. What if they come for you? The boy asked. The Morty shrugged. Then let them. They can silence me, but they can't silence the question. Once it's been asked, it never disappears. The boy sat with him, the two of them staring into the stars. For a long time, neither spoke. Then softly the boy whispered almost to himself, "Why are we here?" And for the first time, the Morty who asked why laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not a broken one, but a laugh full of wonder. "That's the truest question of all," he said. The boy smiled too, the sound of that laugh staying with him like a lullaby. The Citadel went on, its halls unchanged. But the boy knew it was not the same. Somewhere in its endless rows, in its measured order, a quiet question now pulsed like a heartbeat. And though the council might try to smother it, the boy knew the question would grow, as questions always do, because once a Morty has asked why, silence is never the same again. The Citadel had many towers. Some were built for study, their walls humming with calculations. Others were for defense, though no one could quite say against whom. But there was one tower that stood quietly apart, its surface polished like glass, its doors rarely opened. It was called the Tower of Reflection. Few spoke of it. Fewer entered. Yet the boy of two sons found himself drawn to it one evening, as though some gentle hand had guided his steps. The air grew softer the closer he came. The Citadel's usual noise, the muttering of ricks, the shuffle of Mortys, the clatter of machinery, seemed to fade. Even the light grew hushed, settling into a silver-blue glow. The tower did not rise with grandeur, but with quiet certainty, as though it had been built not to impress but to listen. He placed his hand against the door. It opened without sound. Inside, the space was vast but empty. There were no desks, no scrolls, no guards, only a wide chamber lined with mirrors. Not ordinary mirrors, though. These did not simply reflect the face or the body. They shimmered, as though the glass held more than surface. The boy stepped closer. In the first mirror, he saw himself as he was, a boy with tired eyes, his hair tousled, his hands restless. Yet there was something softened in his gaze, as though the mirror had caught not only his shape, but the quiet of his spirit. He moved to the next mirror. Here he saw a child younger than he remembered being, sitting on the steps of a small home, watching the sun dip twice beneath the horizon. The child was humming to himself, a tune he thought he had forgotten. The sight made his chest ache with a kind of sweet sadness. Another mirror showed him standing in the Morty library, his hands brushing the spines of books he hadn't yet read. His expression was one of awe, but there was fear there too, a worry that he would not be allowed to finish the story. The boy turned away, heart heavy. Then came a mirror that startled him, for it did not show him at all. It showed the Morty who asked why, sitting on the steps, a pebble in his hand. The boy could almost hear his voice again. Being afraid and being silent aren't the same thing. Another mirror shimmered, and within it stood the Rick who did not belong. His coat was frayed, his eyes weary, but his face held a stubborn light. He looked as though he were waiting for something, perhaps for someone to believe in him. The boy stepped back. His breath felt shallow. These were not just mirrors. They were memory, possibility, and truth, folded together. He walked further to a mirror at the end of the hall. This one was darker, its glass veiled with mist. Slowly the mist cleared, and the boy saw himself older, much older, standing alone at the edge of a garden beneath the towers. His shoulders were bent, his hair silver, but his eyes were still searching. He was carrying something in his hands, though the boy could not see what. The sight filled him with a trembling quiet. Was this who he would become? Or only one of many possible selves, waiting in the folds of time? A voice drifted through the chamber then, soft as falling dust. "The tower does not decide," it said. "It only shows what already lingers in you." The boy turned, but no one was there. The voice seemed to come from the mirrors themselves, as if they were speaking through the reflection of his own heart. He swallowed, whispering, "Why show me these things?" The voice answered gently, "Because even in a place built to control, you must remember you are more than what they decide. You are story. You are echo. You are choice." The boy felt warmth sting his eyes. For so long he had thought of himself as small, a piece in the council's endless machine, a shadow trailing the steps of Rick's. But here, in this silent tower, he saw that he was also something vast, a memory carried forward, a possibility still unwritten. He lingered before the mirrors, letting them wash over him like tide. In one he saw the boy who dreamed in echoes. In another, the friend he had met in dreams. In another still, a chair left empty, waiting for his return. Each reflection seemed to breathe. You are not alone. At last he sat on the floor, folding his legs beneath him. The mirrors hummed faintly, almost like a lullaby. His eyes grew heavy, but not from weariness, from peace. For the first time in a long while, the boy was not searching outward. He was simply sitting with himself, listening to the soft questions that lived in his chest. How long he stayed, he could not say. Perhaps an hour, perhaps a night. Time itself felt different in the tower of reflection, as though it stretched and folded unhurried. When at last he rose, he bowed his head to the mirrors, whispering a quiet thank you. Then he stepped back into the Citadel's air, carrying with him a stillness he had not known before. The halls outside felt different now. The clatter of Rick's, the shuffle of Morty's, it no longer swallowed him whole. It was only sound, passing and fading. Inside, the boy carried something the council could not take, a reflection of his own becoming, and as he walked, he wondered if perhaps every Morty in their own time might find their way to the tower, to sit in the hush, to see themselves as more than shadow, to whisper a question into the glass, and to listen for the quiet answer, because the Citadel could command obedience. It could demand silence, but it could never take away the wonder of a Morty who paused to look inward and to see. The boy carried that truth with him like a lantern, dim but steady, lighting his next steps in the endless night of the Citadel. Long before the Citadel became a place of speeches and orders, it was said that a sound moved through its stones, a faint hum like a note held just beneath hearing. Most ignored it, dismissing it as the rattle of pipes or the hum of machines, but the boy of two sons began to notice it after leaving the Tower of Reflection. At first it came at night when the Citadel grew still, a tone so soft it seemed to vibrate from within his bones. He would wake and sit upright, heart beating slow, listening. It was not music as he had known it in childhood, no instruments, no voices, but something older, a thread of sound woven into the Citadel itself. The next day he asked a Morty about it. The Morty frowned. "I don't hear anything." He asked another and another. All shook their heads. Only one, an elder Morty with hair silver at the temples, leaned close and whispered, "Careful what you admit to hearing. Some songs aren't meant to be spoken of aloud." That night the boy stayed awake, waiting. And when the hum came again, he followed it. It drew him through narrow corridors, down stairwells that smelled of dust and time, and finally into a chamber he had never seen. The room was small, tucked deep in the Citadel's belly. Its walls were carved smooth, unlike the rest of the fortress, and from the ceiling hung threads of crystal faintly glowing. The boy stood still. The song was clearer here, low, patient, almost like breath. He closed his eyes and felt it ripple through him. Then he heard something else. Their voice, not words, not exactly. More like a tone that rose and fell with intention, almost a melody. It seemed to say, "You are listening. You are awake." The boy opened his eyes, startled. No one was there. Yet he felt less alone than ever before. He returned to that chamber again and again. Each time the song grew richer, weaving new notes around the steady hum. Some nights it sounded like water over stone. Other nights like a choir just beyond a wall. And sometimes, faintly, it sounded like the voices of Mortys, laughing, murmuring, breathing together in secret harmony. The boy began to hum along, softly, afraid of breaking the spell. At first his voice trembled, but soon it found the thread weaving with it. And when he did, the song seemed to welcome him, lifting, widening, becoming more than sound. He noticed something strange. When he left the chamber after humming with it, the Citadel seemed lighter. The corridors felt less heavy, the faces of Mortys less resigned. Even Rick's for a heartbeat seemed less sharp-edged. The boy wondered if the song was not only hidden in stone, but also in hearts waiting to be remembered. One evening, he brought the Morty who asked why. Together they sat in the chamber, eyes closed, listening. The other Morty tilted his head, his expression caught between awe and sadness. "I hear it," he whispered. They hummed together, two voices folding into the unseen melody. For a moment, the boy thought he saw the walls shimmer, as though the Citadel itself were breathing with them. Afterward, the Morty who asked why placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "This is the sound they fear most," he said quietly. "Not shouts, not rebellion, but this." Mortys remembering they are more than silence. The boy felt the truth of it settle deep inside him. In dreams that week, The song followed him. Through the endless hallways of shared slumber, he heard it weaving faintly, and his dream companion heard it too. They hummed it together, their voices echoing like lanterns in the dark. But outside dreams, in waking halls, he spoke of it to no one else. He knew some things could not survive the scrutiny of Rix, or the suspicion of the council. The hidden song had to remain hidden, growing quietly, moving beneath notice like roots beneath soil. Still, traces of it began to spread. A Morty hummed under his breath while cleaning the steps. Another tapped a rhythm against a desk, though he could not explain why. A Rick paused one night and asked his Morty why he was smiling without reason. The Morty shrugged and said nothing, but the song lingered in his chest. The boy realized then that the song was not something he had discovered. It had always been there, older than the Citadel itself, waiting for ears willing to hear. It was memory turned into music, sorrow softened into sound, hope carried not in speeches but in vibration. On the night of the Citadel's first festival, when lights hung heavy and laughter tried to drown despair, the boy slipped away to the hidden chamber. He sat alone in the glow of crystals, listening. And this time the song seemed to swell for him alone. It rose like dawn, tender and patient, filling the chamber until he could almost believe the Citadel was not a prison, but a living being, humming to itself to keep from breaking. The boy closed his eyes, tears slipping quietly down his cheeks. He did not wipe them away. He simply let them fall, each one caught by the rhythm of the hidden song. Later, when he returned to his bed, he carried the hum inside him. It echoed with every breath. He knew then that the Citadel might crumble one day, towers falling, councils fading, but the song would remain, carried in those who had heard it, passed from Morty to Morty, remembered in the silence between words, because music, once heard, is never truly lost. The boy drifted into sleep, the melody still in his chest, a lullaby not written but remembered. And in that quiet hour the Citadel, for all its walls and shadows, seemed to dream with him. There was a corner of the Citadel that few noticed, a tucked-away place where shadows softened and the hum of distant machines became a gentle lull. In that space, the boy of two sons met an old Rick, not the kind who shouted instructions or tinkered endlessly in laboratories, but a quiet Rick whose hands shook slightly, whose eyes held the soft weight of years, and whose voice was low, almost like a whisper meant for memory alone. The young Morty who had always asked why had discovered him first. He had wandered down a dim hallway, past rooms filled with order and expectation, and found the old Rick sitting on a worn bench, staring at a patch of sunlight that leaked through a high window. "Hello," the Morty said, unsure if anyone would answer. The old Rick turned slowly, his eyes narrowing and then softening. "Hello," he replied, his voice carrying a rhythm of patience and quiet knowing. The Morty hesitated, then sat beside him. There was no chair, just the bench, and in that small, uneven space a strange peace settled. "You come often?" the Rick asked, not out of curiosity but observation. "Sometimes," the Morty admitted. I like quiet." The old Rick nodded. "Quiet is underrated. People chase noise as if it will explain everything, but it rarely does. Quiet lets you hear things you're not supposed to hear. Say it lets you remember things you've forgotten." The boy of two sons arrived later, drawn by the soft rhythm of conversation, the calm that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat in that forgotten corridor. The old Rick glanced at him, and the boy noticed that the corners of his eyes crinkled not in irritation, but in recognition. "Ah," the Rick said softly, "you've been walking the hallways, haven't you? You carry the hum inside you." The boy nodded. I think I've been listening to the Citadel." "That's good," the Rick murmured, "though the Citadel doesn't like to be listened to. It prefers obedience. It prefers fear. But you," he paused, looking at both Mortys, "you prefer awareness. That's dangerous and wonderful." The young Morty frowned. "Why do you stay here if it's dangerous?" The Rick chuckled faintly. "Because someone has to. And because sometimes the Citadel is quiet enough to teach you things you cannot learn anywhere else. Sometimes it hums in ways only patient ears can hear. For a long time they simply sat, the three of them, a small trio in a vast, ordered world. Sunlight shifted through the window, casting slow shadows across the floor. Outside, the Citadel moved and breathed, its noise pressing at the walls, but inside that corner, time slowed. The boy thought about the Tower of Reflection, about the hidden song, about empty chairs and shared dreams. And he realized that this old Rick, so different from the loud, assertive ones, held pieces of the same truths. "You know," the old Rick said quietly, "I've seen too many Mortys forget themselves. Too many Ricks forget what it means to care. But sometimes all it takes is a single question, a single listen, a single heartbeat. That's enough to start something." The young Morty leaned back. "You mean, even small things matter?" The Rick nodded slowly. "Everything matters. The smallest act, the quietest word, even a humming seed tucked into a coat pocket. They ripple outward. People think the Citadel is endless, and so it is, but ripples matter more than walls." The boy of two sons let those words sink in. He thought of all the small things he had carried, the dreams, the sandwiches, the music, the chairs, the seeds, and for the first time he saw them as not just survival, but as rebellion, as life, as quiet heroism. Will you teach us?" the young Morty asked, voice barely above the floor. The old Rick smiled faintly, leaning back against the bench. "Teach, perhaps, but I cannot give lessons like the council would allow. I can only guide, only sit with you in the quiet, only show that even in this place there is room to breathe. That's the kind of teaching that matters, the kind that lasts." They talked then in soft phrases, half-whispered, about things that had happened and things that might, about the Mortys who had vanished, about the Ricks who had grown too loud, about the gardens beneath the towers, the steps, the hallways, the songs. The boy shared the hidden song he had discovered. The old Rick listened with closed eyes, letting the melody fold through the silence like water over stones. He hummed once faintly, and it seemed to awaken the walls themselves, though no one outside the small corner would notice. Later, the young Morty spoke of his questions. "What if they never let us leave?" he asked softly. "What if we're trapped?" The old Rick's eyes softened. "Then you leave in other ways. You leave in stories, in dreams, in songs, in quiet acts of care. You leave in the way you remember. There is freedom inside that no Citadel can touch." The boy understood. He understood why this quiet Rick had remained hidden. Not because he was weak, but because he had learned to preserve the things that mattered most, the seeds, the dreams, the quiet acts that built invisible bridges between Mortys and sometimes between Ricks. The old Rick spoke one final phrase that evening, words meant to fold into the listener's heart like a gentle hand. "Someday, someone will remember us in ways the council never could. And in that remembering we live." The three of them stayed a little longer, letting silence settle like a soft blanket. Outside, the Citadel hummed its predictable rhythm. Inside, there was only quiet, and the weight of gentle wisdom, and the first warm notes of something like hope. When the boy and the young Morty finally rose to leave, the old Rick nodded. "Walk the halls carefully, listen, notice, and remember, small things echo." The boy of two sons whispered, "Thank you." The young Morty added, "Thank you for showing us quiet matters, too." The Rick smiled faintly, eyes twinkling with soft memory. "And thank you for listening." As they walked down the hall, the boy realized that the quietest moments could carry more courage than the loudest declarations. That the hum of the Citadel was never truly oppressive. It simply waited for ears willing to hear. And that sometimes the bond between a young Morty and a quiet Rick could hold worlds together, one gentle heartbeat at a time. They vanished into the night corridors, carrying with them the warmth of shared understanding, and the old Rick remained, still smiling faintly, humming a note of hidden melody that would travel quietly through the Citadel, threading through unseen halls, waiting for the next Morty willing to ask why. The Citadel was never truly dark. There were always corridors alive with the hum of machinery, the shuffle of footsteps, the endless murmur of voices. Yet there were moments, rare, fleeting, when the glow of the usual lights did not reach. A hall could stretch endlessly, its walls swallowed in shadow, and the Citadel seemed to hold its breath. It was in one such hall that the boy of two sons found a lantern he had been wandering after the festival, after the hidden song, after the quiet conversation with the old Rick and the young Morty. He did not know why he had chosen this hallway, only that the hum inside him seemed to pull him forward. The lantern was small, old-fashioned, a delicate thing that swung slightly from a hook embedded in the wall. Its flame flickered softly as though aware of him. The boy paused and stared. Its light was gentle, not harsh like the Citadel's usual glow, but warm, almost tender. He reached out, and for a moment the flame seemed to rise toward his hand. He drew back instinctively, but then he noticed something strange. The light did not burn. Instead, it pulsed in rhythm with his own heartbeat, or perhaps with the quiet hum he had carried since discovering the hidden song. He picked it up. The lantern felt light, not heavy, as if it were not an object but a companion. He began to walk, and the dark hall stretched endlessly before him. Shadows leaned back respectfully, giving way to the soft arc of the lantern's glow. As he moved, he realized that the hall seemed to respond to him. The farther he walked, the deeper the glow spread, illuminating corners he had never noticed, revealing doors that led to quiet rooms, alcoves, and narrow stairways, places that had always existed but had never been seen. He thought of the Tower of Reflection, of the Morty who asked why, of empty chairs, hidden songs, and small acts of defiance. The lantern was like all of those things, small, unnoticed by most, but carrying the power to change perception, to carve space for hope in the strict order of the Citadel. Somewhere in the hall a faint whisper rose. Not a voice exactly, but a sense of presence. The boy paused and listened. "You've found it," said the whisper, soft as silk. "The lantern chooses who carries it. It cannot be forced. Only those who walk in quiet attention may hold its flame." The boy looked around. No one was there. Only the shadows leaned closer, curious but patient. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it," he admitted. "Walk," the whisper said simply. "Walk and remember. Walk and notice. Walk and you will see what others cannot. The Citadel is full of order, full of rules, full of expectations, but light can exist anywhere. Even here." He continued forward. The hall stretched on, twisting gently, as though the Citadel itself was guiding him. The lantern's glow seemed to reveal not only physical spaces, but memories, traces of things that had been. A patch of sunlight from another day, faint outlines of footsteps long gone, shadows where laughter once echoed. The boy realized the lantern was not only light, but a kind of listening. He could feel it responding to him, sensing the quiet hum of his heart, the thoughts he did not speak aloud. It was patient, gentle, and infinitely kind. At one bend in the hall he discovered a small room. Inside were tables covered with dust, shelves lined with forgotten tools, and windows that opened to nothing but the endless dark of the Citadel beyond. He placed the lantern on a table, and for a moment it seemed to grow, spreading warmth across every corner. He imagined the old Rick and the young Morty here. He imagined the hidden song threading through this hall, filling the space with faint music. He imagined the Mortys who had disappeared, whose chairs remained empty, whose whispers lingered unseen. And for the first time, he felt a connection that stretched across the entire Citadel, a delicate web of hope, memory, and quiet courage. The boy lifted the lantern again and walked further. He noticed how shadows softened, how walls seemed to lean toward him without weight, how the hum inside him grew richer, deeper. It was as though the lantern carried not only light but understanding, a promise that even in darkness, guidance could exist. He stopped near a window, looking down into a courtyard below. The festival had ended hours ago, but he could see faint shapes moving in dreamlike loops. Mortys folding paper stars, Ricks pacing slowly, lanterns left behind, casting shadows in the night. It was peaceful, as though the world had exhaled and allowed itself a pause. He set the lantern down, kneeling beside it. Its glow painted the walls with gentle warmth, enough to soothe but not to reveal everything. Some mysteries were meant to remain, he realized. Some darkness was necessary for the light to matter. A soft thought drifted through him. Light is not always about revealing. Sometimes it is about remembering. The boy closed his eyes. He imagined every act of quiet courage he had seen, every song hummed in secret, every question whispered, every empty chair held with care, and he understood that the lantern was a symbol, a guide and a witness all at once. It bore witness to the small bravery of ordinary Mortys, to the unseen care of quiet Ricks, and to the subtle threads that bound them together in ways the Citadel could never measure. He carried it with him for a long walk afterward, through corridors that seemed longer than memory and shorter than a heartbeat. He placed it carefully on the steps of the hall, where Mortys often lingered after lessons, watching, wondering, dreaming. And in that moment, he realized something profound. The Citadel could never truly extinguish light. It could impose rules, demand obedience, measure success, and shape fear. but a lantern, carried softly, could pierce the shadows. And that light, no matter how small, could ripple quietly, invisibly, through every hallway, every room, every heart. The boy tucked the lantern beside him as he made his way back to his own quarters. He didn't need it to see the hallways. He had carried the glow inside him all along. That night, as he lay down beneath the soft hum of the Citadel's distant engines, he whispered into the dark, "Light exists even in unexpected places. Even here, even now." The lantern's glow, though small, seemed to hum in response, as if acknowledging him. It was patient. It was steady. It was proof that even in the vast corridors of order, hope could travel quietly, softly, persistently, and the boy of two suns drifted to sleep, the citadel around him deep and dark, the lantern at his side, and the gentle certainty that he was never truly alone. In the citadel, most stories were spoken only once, and then carefully folded away. Spoken too loudly, they could attract Rix's sharp eyes or provoke rules that seemed older than time itself. And yet, some stories survived anyway, carried in whispers, in glances, in moments too small to notice. The boy of two suns had learned to listen for them. He had heard the hidden song, walked beneath the glow of lanterns, traced shadows in the tower of reflection. But the stories he discovered here were subtler, quiet, almost invisible, like breath held in the soft folds of a corridor. He found the first one in a forgotten room, tucked beneath a spiral staircase. Dust lay thick on the floor and the air smelled of memory. On a shelf, he discovered a stack of papers tied together with string. The words were faded, the handwriting trembling. And yet, the stories were alive, more alive than anything the Citadel had tried to teach him. They told of Mortys who had wandered too far from orders and returned changed, carrying glimpses of courage or kindness no one else noticed. They told of Rix who had paused in their own pride to help just once, a Morty who had asked why. They told of laughter that had leaked through hallways, songs that had floated like mist in quiet rooms, moments of care that had never been acknowledged, but had left lasting echoes. The boy read, and the hall seemed to breathe with him. Each story, untold and hidden, felt like a lantern flickering in the dark, reminding him that what is unseen can be just as powerful as what is celebrated. He moved on, carrying the sense of these quiet lives into the halls he knew so well. Mortys passed him in lines, shoulders hunched, eyes trained on the floor, yet he imagined the hidden stories in each of them. Every hesitant smile, every small act of kindness, every whispered question, he realized they were threads woven into the tapestry of the Citadel, invisible but unbreakable. In another room he found sketches, little drawings of towers, gardens, chairs and stars, signed with names he didn't know. Some were the work of Mortys, some perhaps of Rix who had grown tired of measuring power and instead measured wonder. The boy traced a finger over a delicate pencil line, imagining the person who had drawn it, and felt a gentle warmth. He thought of the old Rick and the young Morty, of the Morty who asked why, of the chairs that remained empty, of the hidden song, and the lanterns in dark halls. Every untold story seemed connected, a quiet network of care and curiosity running beneath the Citadel's strict order. Later, he wandered into a hall where the walls were etched with faint marks, scratches, swirls, symbols too small to notice at first glance. He realized they were stories, too, carved by hands that had no permission, written not for authority but for memory itself. A Morty who had been lonely, a Rick who had felt doubt, a pair of friends who had shared laughter and then been separated. These marks whispered to him, we existed, we mattered. The boy began to imagine the voices behind these untold stories, soft echoes that crossed corridors and floors, connecting the Citadel in ways no rulebook could measure. He imagined them speaking not in words but in glances, in small choices, in shared meals and unspoken care. And he understood something profound. The stories that are never told aloud still shape the world. He paused in a quiet alcove, closing his eyes. In his mind, he could hear fragments of these narratives. A Morty humming softly while fixing a broken tool, a Rick pausing to notice a seed tucked in a coat, a chair left empty in remembrance of someone gone. They formed a gentle chorus, a melody stitched from lives that had not sought recognition, but had nonetheless left their mark. It was here, in the quiet, that he understood why the Citadel feared questions like why. Why could not be measured, controlled, or confined? Why lived in the untold stories, in the choices that slipped beneath notice, in the small acts of courage no one applauded. The boy of two sons felt his chest fill with a slow, steady wonder, a quiet awe that carried him through the remainder of the hallways that evening. He imagined sharing these stories, carefully, in whispers or soft laughter, so that others might feel the weight and warmth of what had been hidden. And yet he also understood that some stories are meant to remain untold, to exist in the shadows and light, where only those willing to notice can find them. As he walked toward a familiar courtyard, he saw a group of Mortys sitting quietly together, passing small objects between them. Some were seeds, some were scraps of paper, others were drawings or folded stars. He realized in a slow, gentle breath that these were untold stories too. They were being passed quietly, invisibly from hand to hand, heart to heart. The boy lingered a moment watching and felt a surge of gratitude. Every small act mattered. Every quiet memory mattered. Every untold story was alive, traveling unseen but endlessly powerful. He imagined the Citadel itself as a kind of keeper of these narratives, though imperfect, indifferent at times, yet still carrying echoes of everything lived within its walls. And for the first time he felt that the Citadel, despite all its order and control, could not erase the quiet truth, that life, even when unnoticed, always leaves traces. That night, when he returned to his quarters, the boy lay awake listening to the faint hum of the Citadel, imagining the untold stories weaving themselves into the spaces between engines and corridors, into the hearts of Mortys and Ricks alike. He thought of chairs left empty, of songs hidden in walls, of lanterns swinging in dark halls, and of every whispered question that had ever dared to pierce the silence. He closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of unseen lives and unheard voices, and in that gentle darkness he understood the most delicate truth of all, that stories do not need to be told aloud to matter, that they carry weight in quiet ways, shaping hearts, shaping hope, shaping the world itself. And as he drifted into sleep, he whispered softly into the still night, "We remember you. We carry you. I see you." The Citadel breathed around him, vast and shadowed, but inside his chest a small warmth glowed. The untold stories were alive, and in their quiet pulse, so was he. The Citadel had learned many things over countless cycles: order, repetition, precision, and the careful measurement of Mortys and Ricks. But there were some lessons it could never impose, no matter how strict or how vast. One of those was the art of goodbye. The boy of two sons discovered this quietly, as all meaningful discoveries come, without ceremony, without announcement, without expectation. It began with a hallway bathed in the soft glow of late evening, where shadows leaned long and walls seemed to sigh. The boy had been wandering alone, carrying the memory of the hidden song, the lantern in the dark hall, the tower of reflection, and the stories they did not tell. Each step was light, each breath slow and deliberate. Ahead he saw a figure sitting on the steps, back straight, hands resting gently on knees. It was the young Morty who had always asked why. He looked different somehow, older though not yet grown, as if the questions he had carried for so long had softened him in ways no one else could see. The boy approached and sat beside him. They did not speak at first. The silence was not empty. It was warm, filled with understanding. They had shared moments that needed no words: the quiet song, the flickering lantern, the small acts of courage. These things were enough. "You're leaving soon," the boy said softly, though he did not look up. The Morty nodded, eyes tracing the worn edges of the steps. "Yes," he said quietly. "It's time. I have to find where I belong, even if I don't know where that is yet." The boy understood. It was a gentle goodbye, not sudden, not desperate, but full of the kind of clarity that comes after long shared experience. "I'll carry the song," the boy whispered. "The lantern, the reflections, all of it." "I'll remember," the Morty smiled faintly. "And I'll carry the questions, always, even when they try to silence them." They sat together a while longer, letting the rhythm of the Citadel's hum wash over them. Each beat of machinery, each faint echo of distant voices, became part of the farewell, not sorrowful but soft, like a lullaby that stretches across time. When the boy finally spoke again, It was with the gentlest of words. I'm glad I met you. I'm glad we walked through all of it together. Even the small things mattered. Yes, the Morty agreed, voice almost a whisper. Even the smallest acts echo, don't they? The boy nodded. He remembered the empty chairs, the gardens beneath towers, the hidden song, the lanterns that guided unseen paths. Each memory was a thread, and now their threads intertwined in ways that would persist, even when the Morty left the Citadel. The Morty rose slowly. His movements were deliberate, careful. He extended a hand, which the boy took. It was a simple gesture, yet full of meaning. A goodbye need not be loud to carry weight. It could be gentle, almost imperceptible, and still resonate. Take care, the Morty said softly. Walk the halls with patience. Listen to the quiet. And remember, you're never alone even when you feel it. The boy squeezed his hand once, long enough to share the gratitude that words could not hold. Then the Morty turned, moving down the corridor toward the light that waited beyond. Each step was slow, measured, a careful transition from one chapter of life to another. The boy watched until the figure disappeared from sight. And though a gentle ache stirred in his chest, it was not sorrow. It was understanding. A recognition that farewells could be tender without being heavy, that leaving could be an act of courage, as quiet as asking why. After a while, he rose and walked to the steps he had just left. He sat there alone, letting the evening settle around him. The Citadel's hum softened, and in the gaps between the noise he heard faint echoes of all that had passed, the hidden song, whispered questions, untold stories, the lantern, reflections in mirrors. They were still with him, in ways both subtle and profound. He thought of the old Rick who had taught patience and quiet courage. He thought of chairs left empty, gardens beneath towers, Mortys who had dared small acts of bravery. And he understood that life, even in a place built for order and control, could hold tenderness, could hold connection, could hold gentle goodbyes. He allowed himself to breathe fully for the first time in what felt like ages. Each inhale carried warmth, each exhale released tension. The Citadel, vast and imposing, was no longer a cage in his mind. It was a place that had taught him in its quiet way the value of small moments, the weight of gentle courage, the power of soft farewells. Night deepened around him. The windows reflected the stars, countless points of light scattered like the untold stories he had learned to see. He closed his eyes and imagined the Morty who had asked why moving through new corridors, discovering new questions, carrying his courage like a lantern in dark halls. A gentle smile touched his lips. He whispered to the night softly, almost as a lullaby for himself and for the unseen Mortys still walking the Citadel. Thank you. For everything. For the songs, the stories, the questions, the quiet. I will carry them. And somewhere in the Citadel, in a hall untouched by ricks or rules, a faint light flickered. Perhaps it was a lantern. Perhaps it was memory made tangible. Perhaps it was the pulse of all the small brave acts, all the untold stories, all the moments of quiet care, combining into a single, persistent glow. The boy of two suns stood finely, stretching slowly, feeling the Citadel's gentle rhythm align with his own. He turned, walking toward corridors he had yet to explore, carrying in his chest the weightless warmth of all he had learned, all he had witnessed and all he had shared. Outside, the stars pulsed softly, as if the universe itself had exhaled, approving this gentle farewell. The boy understood then that goodbyes did not erase presence. They simply changed its shape. They allowed memory, song, and courage to travel forward, to ripple outward quietly, invisibly, endlessly, and in the stillness in that soft, perfect night. He whispered one last thought before sleep embraced him. Thank you for the quiet, for the light, for the courage. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man. The Citadel, in all its towering complexity, had a way of feeling eternal, as though it had always existed and would always exist. And yet the boy of two suns, now older in ways both quiet and profound, knew that even eternal places could be gentle, could be forgiving, could carry the memory of those who moved softly within their walls. He walked slowly through the halls he had wandered countless times, noticing the subtle changes, a flicker of light along a stairway, the faint echo of a hidden song he had once hummed with another, a shadow that leaned slightly, patiently, as though it remembered him. There was no rush, no urgency. The Citadel's usual hum was softened, almost reverent. as if it knew he had learned the lessons it could never teach aloud. He paused at a familiar window, gazing out at the distant towers and winding corridors below. The city stretched endlessly, glittering faintly with lights both artificial and alive, yet he saw in it not only structure and order, but the delicate traces of memory. Mortys who had whispered questions, Ricks who had paused for moments of quiet care, chairs left empty in remembrance, gardens that thrived beneath towers, lanterns flickering in dark halls. He thought of the hidden song, still humming somewhere in the Citadel's deep bones. He thought of the old Rick and the young Morty, of the Morty who had asked why, of stories untold and small acts of courage, and in the quiet of his mind, he understood a truth that felt like a soft exhale. No matter how much time passed, no matter how many corridors changed or towers shifted, the presence of those moments remained. They were not gone. They were not lost. He imagined them still, moving gently through the Citadel's vastness. Perhaps the old Rick hummed in a corner, or perhaps the young Morty paused to consider a question he had not yet asked. Perhaps the Mortys who had vanished wandered in quiet corners, or perhaps they were asleep, dreaming together, carrying the lanterns and songs forward. The boy smiled softly, closing his eyes for a moment, letting memory and imagination blend into one continuous current. He felt the pulse of the Citadel in tandem with his own heartbeat, slow and steady, a rhythm that whispered, "You are never truly alone." He thought of all the farewells that had passed, gentle, tender, quiet, and realized that goodbye did not erase presence. It simply transformed it. Love, courage, music, and care could continue to exist, traveling in subtle ways, folding themselves into the corners of time and space, leaving echoes for those willing to notice. As he walked further down a familiar hallway, he spotted a lantern swinging lightly from a hook. Its flame flickered and he smiled. It had been here all along, waiting for someone to walk slowly enough, attentively enough to see it. He reached out and touched it gently. The warmth seeped into his hand and traveled through him, a quiet reminder that light, like memory, could persist even in vast darkness. The boy thought of the hidden song, the untold stories, the chairs, the gardens, the laughter, the questions, and he realized that these things were not confined to him alone. They existed wherever someone remembered, wherever someone cared, wherever someone paused in quiet attention. He let his gaze drift through the halls, past rooms and stairways, past towers and courtyards. He imagined the echoes of small unseen acts of courage traveling through the Citadel, a Morty humming softly while another listened, a Rick pausing to see the seed tucked in a coat, an empty chair held with quiet remembrance. The Citadel, despite its rigid order, carried them all in its bones. In that moment, he understood something delicate and profound, that presence is not measured by recognition, and impact is not measured by applause. Some things matter because they are lived, because they are carried, because they are remembered. He paused at the highest tower he had ever reached, looking out over the sprawling city. Stars glittered in the night sky, scattered like seeds across a dark field. And for the first time he felt a sense of completion, not of endings but of continuation. Every song, every story, every quiet act of bravery, every lantern, every whispered question, these threads were woven together, eternal in their subtlety, traveling quietly through the corridors, moving through hearts, outlasting time itself. He allowed himself to breathe fully, letting the weight of experience settle gently. No sudden conclusions, no dramatic resolutions, only the calm assurance that all that had been lived, all that had been shared, all that had been quietly nurtured, persisted, the boy whispered softly, a lullaby for the Citadel and for himself. You are remembered. You are carried. You are part of the light, the song, the quiet courage that never fades. The lantern on the tower flickered gently in response, as if acknowledging him, as if answering, "Yes, we are still here, still out there somewhere." He turned, walking back through the corridors he knew so well. Each step was slow, deliberate, a rhythm in tune with memory and time. He saw the faint outlines of stories passed down, lanterns swinging in unseen halls, the hum of the hidden song threading through walls. At last, he returned to a quiet corner, sat down, and closed his eyes. He could feel the Citadel breathing around him, expansive yet intimate, harsh yet tender, and he understood that every act, every presence, Every gentle choice had created a world within it that no rules could erase. Somewhere the old Rick still hummed. Somewhere the young Morty still asked why. Somewhere untold stories floated through unseen corridors. Somewhere the hidden song traveled quietly, rippling softly, echoing in the spaces between walls, and the boy of two suns, now carrying the sum of all he had learned, stretched a little, feeling the weightless warmth of memory. Love and courage settle across him. He whispered one final thought into the gentle hum of the Citadel, and somewhere, he's still out there napping in the sun. The Citadel's hum continued, soft and steady, carrying with it the echoes of lanterns, songs, laughter, questions, and quiet acts of bravery. The night remained calm, and the stars blinked their slow, patient rhythm, and with that the boy of two suns exhaled, letting the gentle quiet fill him entirely, carrying forward all the songs, stories, and lights he had discovered, sharing them silently with every heart willing to remember. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man.